Okay, we're going to start the meeting. This is the meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Northampton State Hospital, now known as Village Hill, Northampton. This is, it's Monday, November 17th, 2008. And I'm just going to lay out the agenda, then I'm going to ask Corinne to just make sure that we have the attendance taken, and then we'll go into the presentation. So the agenda tonight is presentation of the proposed revised master plan, public comment, then the discussion among members of the CAC. We're going to move the vote tonight, but there is no requirement to take a vote tonight. We're going to put it on the table for the purpose of the discussion. We'll see where it goes, and then we'll set the next meeting. Corinne, you've taken attendance?
There's a sign-up sheet for speakers, and I will pass around a tab for anyone. Put your email address, and you can send you minutes.
Great. And I think we have everybody who is on the CAC here tonight, so congratulations.
David has a question.
Yeah, we're going to do that. I was actually going to ask Corinne to take the roll, and that would accomplish the same thing. So could you do that, if you wouldn't mind?
Everyone's here.
Yeah, would you just read off the names so we can say that everybody is?
Mayor Higgins.
Mr. President.
David Narkowitz. Reverend Moser. Rutherford Platt. Charles DeRose.
Here.
Edward Skrosky. Attorney Bruce Fogel.
Present.
Daniel Yakuzo.
Present.
Michael Rayborn.
Present.
John Horner.
Present.
Randy Johnson.
Present.
Dave Modulewski.
Present.
Joseph Blumenthal.
Present.
Harriet Diamond. Jamie Albro Fisher.
Present.
And David Drake.
Present.
Okay. So everybody's here. So we're first going to ask Mass Development to do their presentation, and that'll include the revision to the master plan, and they've also come back with answers to some questions that came up at our last meeting. So take it away. Can I just remind, I want to do one more just piece of housekeeping here. The discussion we're having tonight is on the master plan, which is the CAC's purview. And we're going to also talk about what the other permitting steps are along the way. I think they're going to talk about that as part of their presentation.
Okay, I wanted to first introduce ourselves. I'm Beth Murphy. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate. Yes? Somebody move the podium while the presentation is going on? Oh, sure. I don't know.
You can't see through it.
I've got the last podium.
Just the transparency.
Okay. Yes. So I'm Beth Murphy. I'm Vice President of Real Estate Development for Mass Development, and I'm also the project manager at Village Hill. And here tonight are several other Mass Development folks, and you can raise your hand when I call your name. Richard Henderson, Executive Vice President of Real Estate Development. Nancy Howard, our Chief Operating Officer. Bob Kay, who is our Senior Vice President for Real Estate Development. Sarah Northrop, who's our on-site engineer. And I think that's everybody. And then there are consultants here from Ty and Bond. It's Dave Loring and Tina Sue from Arrow Street and Larry Spang from Arrow Street. So I didn't forget anybody, I hope. Okay, we're here tonight to do the next part of the presentation on the conceptual master plan for the North Campus. Our agenda is pretty full. The first thing we're going to do is cover the process that we've taken to get here, to get to the approval of the revised master plan, concept master plan for the North Campus. Then we're actually going to walk you through the concept master plan. We've presented it over the last 3 meetings, and this time we want to walk you through in depth all the various areas in the community. We'll go through the Village Hill areas, the different roadways in the neighborhood, and show you how all the pieces of the plan, the commercial, the residential, the open space fit together. And then we'll talk specifically about the residential units and how 100 additional residential units would fit into this concept master plan. And finally, we'll do a preliminary analysis of trip generation, because the next step after reviewing this concept master plan, and if we get approval of it, is to go back to NEPA and discuss and upgrade the traffic studies to show the impact. Next slide. Okay, process, next slide. This, I think everybody's probably becoming very familiar with. This is the context plan for the whole Northampton State Hospital project. What you're seeing there is 500 acres, the original outline of the state hospital. And you will notice that approximately 400 or plus acres of that has been permanently dedicated into open space. So there's Department of Agriculture land, there's Ice Pond Conservation Area, there's some Smith playing fields, there's soccer fields. So 400 out of 500 acres is already permanently dedicated to open space. The remaining 100 or so acres is the subject of our master plan. And so that spans Route 66. There's approximately 60 acres on the north campus and approximately 30 acres on the south campus. Back in May, we revised the South Campus Master Plan, and so since that time, we've been dealing with revising the North Campus Master Plan. Next slide. This, some of you who have been with the process for a long time, and that's many of you, will recall, is the original 2003 Master Plan. This is what our final environmental impact report was based on. And you'll notice in this plan, we go to the South Campus, this plan assumed a co-Morgan building on Earl Street, about 100,000 square feet or so. It also assumed keeping 2 T buildings. Each T building was about 35,000 square feet, plus keeping the rec building as well. Then as you move across the street, it showed an assisted living taking up the area right on Route 66 and Village Hill Road. And then as you move further up Village Hill Road up to about the Coach House, you come to this area which is called the Old Main Mixed Use Area. And it's sort of like a placeholder. And various commercial uses were anticipated happening there, but it was very conceptual in nature. They didn't actually cite those commercial lots. And then as you reach the upper north campus, what you see there is what they've labeled estate residential, and that's about 25 or so houses on an acre or more of lot, and the roadway running between them. Next slide. Here you can see we've dropped in the revised South Campus Conceptual Master Plan, and what that shows you is a space for Cole Morgan, just a concept, not developed yet. Then there's an office retail building on the corner of Route 66. And then as we go down to Earl Street, there's a space for a light industrial building. And here's Volz Clark Associates, which is 20,000 square feet with room to expand to 32,000 square feet. Next slide. Just to review where we've been, how we got here to the process of reviewing a revised North Campus concept plan. Back in June, the CAC members met at the site, and we took a tour of the site, and then we met afterwards, and we had a lengthy discussion of the opportunities and the constraints that existed on the North Campus. And the questions that arose at that time were, the CAC was asking, show us exactly how this might lay out so that we can have some idea of the concept of the additional residential density that you would want to pursue. So we came back September 24th and we laid out some concept master plan, tried to walk you through some of the components of that. And there was quite a few questions about how does each component of this project relate to the other? How does the commercial relate to the residential? Show us the walkability of this campus. Show us how the open space is connected to the rest of the development in such a way as you have an integrated community. Show us how the different types of residential areas work together as a whole. So we took your questions back, we worked on it, and we continued our review of the master plan at the October 22nd meeting. So tonight, we're back again. What we're going to try to do is, once again, more fully walk you through what it would feel like to live in Village Hill based on this new concept master plan. Next slide, please. I also wanted to clarify for everybody the approvals process. First step is the CAC. Just as with that 2003 master plan that I showed you earlier, the CAC approved that master plan. The CAC also back in May approved the amendment to the South Campus plan, which made Cole Morgan possible. And now we're here to talk about amending the North Campus plan. Next slide. Once we have CAC approval, the next step is to go to MEPA and get their approval. So in 2003 master plan, we got MEPA's approval in the form of a final environmental impact report. On the South Campus project change, we went back to MEPA and we got a notice of project change in July of 2008 based on your May approval of that change. And similarly with this project, the changes to the concept master plan, we would go back to MEPA and get their approval for a notice of project change. Next slide. The City Council also has a role to play in this. Originally, they approved the planned village zoning, and then they also approved the 40R zoning for the area south of Ford Crossing and east of New Santee, that original 40R zone. And should you decide to approve the amended plan, they will also amend the 40R zoning to include the area north of Ford Crossing and west of New Santee. Last slide, please. And finally, the planning board has a very large role to play in this. They're originally responsible for the special permit, the site plan, and the design guidelines. It's also approved the subdivision that we now have in place south of Ford Crossing and east of New Santee. And then they will approve the upcoming subdivisions, which will include the revised Ford Crossing Road and Bungalow Area Road that you endorsed at your previous couple of meetings ago. Plus whatever subdivisions and site plan permit applications that we would go before the planning board, including the Cole Morgan site plan application. So all of that has to be reviewed by the planning board before it's considered approved. Next slide, please. I wanted to give everybody an update on the Village Hill development. Earl Street is under reconstruction, as you know. Mass Highway is the project manager there. They've completed the southern portion of that project and have shut down for the season. They plan on coming back in the spring and doing Earl Street from Route 66 down to the portion that they've completed in the south. The Laurel Street, Grove Street reconstruction and sidewalk construction, we have put that out to bid already, and we anticipate opening bids in the early part of 2009 and actually getting that project underway in spring of 2009. Olander, Mosier, and Musanti Road have all been completed, and I'd urge you to go over and take a look. They look very nice. Volks Clark Associates has completed its 20,000 square foot building, and they took occupancy of that building in August of this year. TCB has 6 new apartments under construction, and those are expected to come online early in 2009. Wright Builders has completed 3 single-family homes and has 8 more that are permitted, as well as 12 townhomes that are also permitted. Ford Crossing and Farm Road, which is the bungalow area, we're going to permit them and put them out to bid again early in 2009, hoping to catch the spring construction season for those roadway projects. And finally, the east and west pathways have been completed, and the landscaping improvements around them and at various other points in the site have also been completed. Next. And here's where I turn it over to Larry.
Thank you, Beth. For the record, I'm Larry Spang from Arrow Street. We're an architectural planning and design firm in the Boston area. We've been working, and let me see if I can kind of come down here and not maybe avoid cutting off people's view. We've been working with Mass Development for a while, sorry, except you, Terry.
It's okay.
On various aspects of the planning here, and started in the spring with the changes to the Cole Morgan and adding them to the site. And Mass Development asked us to take a look at the North Campus area, the part that hasn't been built yet, which is to say from about the Coach Building north, and really give that some hard thinking and try and figure out what we could do with that area. So pleased to sort of walk you through this. There's some images you can look at after the presentation, so those will be available. And we have worked with the city to get some of this stuff online, and would expect that we'd be able to do that with this presentation.
Larry, just 1 minute. That's a good place for you to stand, but it's not good for Lachlan's camera.
It's
So
fun, I can still see.
do you want to move
You
over
can see
next
through
to
me?
the other? You want to move to the other next to the other camera, Lachlan?
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's fine.
We could start.
Excuse me.
Careful, Larry, move forward.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Okay. We thought it might make sense to start about some of the planning principles that we're trying to accomplish here. And really it all sort of focuses on this top line, which is to say smart location and smart growth. And many of you have heard the state has a lot of, put a lot of emphasis recently on smart growth programs. We believe this is one of those. It involves building on sites that have been previously developed where infrastructure is available, keeping automobile dependence down, making a walkable community, and bringing the community into the participation of the planning process. And so this is really right with the state's emphasis on that. As part of that exercise, we are focusing on multi-use pathways and open space. As you'll see, there's really a connectivity that we're trying to create both within the development area as well as from the development area out to the surrounding, both back to the main part of Northampton as well as out into the surrounding agricultural areas. We've also developed a strategy of open spaces that have various program uses. So the open spaces are integral to the uses of the residences and of the mixed-use community in a way that really brings the place alive and helps to form a community around it. As part of that, diversity of uses, housing type, and income levels. It's clearly a goal to bring as many different types of people out here and to provide as many different types of housing opportunities. And so you'll see the work that's been done to date on the community builders, the apartments that are there targeted towards the low-income folks, as well as moderate level housing and so forth. So really trying to bring all types of the community in. Adaptive reuse of the site, we'll talk about this a little further, is getting, working with the wonderful attributes, and we'll show you in a minute. Some of the really nice things, if you've been up on the site and have walked around, you will see that it's really a wonderful site. There's a lot of nice things that we'd like to preserve, as well as sustainable design, which in today's climate is really critical, and there's a number of things that are built into the plan that address that, and we'll go through that a bit. Again, photographs here from the summer when it was really nice out there. It's a little less leafy at the moment. This is a shot looking across what was the footprint of the former old main building to the Coach Building in the back, which is being preserved, and you can see the nice landscape tree area. This is the building called the North Employees Home. Some of you may be familiar with, is at the north end of the site. These are some shots of, on the lower hand here is a pathway that goes through by some enormous beech trees. That one there has about a 5-foot diameter radius and is a lovely tree. And the ones above is beautiful standard beech trees, and we'll be talking more about those in a minute. This is the site as it's built out today, and I will apologize a bit. The roads are a little light here, but you can see them. Currently, the existing buildings are these red buildings, are the historic buildings that are left. The brown buildings are under construction or planned to be under construction, and the roadway system comes up right about to here, which is Village Hill Road, stops about there, New Sampson Drive comes in, and Moser comes across here. Oh, I'm sorry, Olander is up there. What is interesting about this and again, it's a little light from back here, is there's contour lines in this area you may be able to see. And what those are showing us is that the hill sort of drops off rapidly from the footprint of the old building, which is just barely masked in there. And it really impacts where we're able to build. So the site tries to work with the topography of the existing site. Sorry, the planning tries to work with the topography of the existing site. These green dots are what are called the specimen trees, and those are the really nice old majestic trees that we're trying to preserve. We have as well, there's a program of street trees. These are showing the street trees, and they also help the roadway show up a little better in this presentation. And then these are the green spaces, which are showing up here, which we're trying to use as a framework to structure the site, and around which the neighborhoods will begin to gather themselves. So it's really trying to integrate the open space, the walkways, the existing trees into a really lovely network of spaces. The pathways, these orangish arrows are showing the various pathways. There's existing paths that run through. There's proposed new pathways. We propose to extend the pathways through the site so that really it becomes very permeable both to the residents of the community as well as people from downtown who want to walk up here and enjoy it as they have been doing for these years. The roadways, again, this shows them a little better. And what we have planned is extensions of those roadways up and into the areas around the site. And really, at this point, it's a neighborhood of about 5 or 6 streets. If you look at it, we have Moser coming up, Village Hill Road, Lowlander, and then the side streets, Moser along here, and Ford Crossing up in this area. So it's really a nice compact neighborhood that's starting to form. And this is showing the plan. Again, you can see these afterwards. What we're looking at, and we'll sort of go through these one by one, is bringing Village Hill Road up and creating a village environment with buildings close to the street, with a nice walkable environment, as much retail or commercial activity as the site can support so that it feels like a village. On the west side of that, as Beth mentioned, is an area that we've targeted and come to call the bungalow area, is small bungalow type units. In the middle, some higher density townhouse type units clustered around a central common or park, which is related to the beech trees in that area. And then in the rear, a series of single family homes, which are about 7,000 square foot lots. So they're not huge like we saw in the previous master plan. Up in the back, and back here, we're showing a nice location for a co-housing development with some shared facilities at the top in the north end there, and some houses that lay along the street there. This is the open space plan, and we'll go through again this in some more details. We thought it might help to see the green space sort of accentuated. Again, the main green space we're looking at is this common space here, this public space around this stand of beech trees. Another park in front of and south of the Coach building, a large park to the rear near the North Employees Home, and then these series of fingers that kind of run through the site and create some wonderful open space opportunities. So the different parts, and we'll go through this in some detail. The Village Hill Road, there you go. In a little more detail, hopefully a little more visible for those in the back. Currently, these buildings here are under construction by the community builders. These apartment buildings here have been renovated. They're the old buildings that have been renovated. The existing male attendance dorm is right there and is waiting reuse. And what we've proposed is a series of buildings that line the street and create a nice village feel as it walks up the hill, the Coach building in the back. At the end, near Prince Street, at the entrance to the village, we would try and concentrate as much of the retail and commercial activity as we can. And then as it goes up, that commercial activity, to the extent we can, pulled back into the site. So there's some mixed-use buildings in this area, and then more housing up towards this area. Just a comparison, this is an aerial photograph on the right of the Florence area of Northampton. This is Main Street coming down through the middle. This is Maple Street right here. And this is Locust Street coming into Maine, where it takes that turn around Trinity Park. So you can see they're both the same scale. We have about the same distance, so if you think of that dimension, that's about how long it is from one side of the hill to the other. And what you can see here is, to the extent that we're creating a street in this area, we're going to try and create as active and pedestrian a street as we can. This is a close-up view of the coach house at the end of the Village Hill Road, or I'm sorry, about the midpoint of Village Hill Road, but at the extent of the village portion of the street. And as you can see, we've created a park on the south side of the building, both to highlight it as well as provide a nice space for the residents. We'd like to see, to the extent the building's fronting onto the street, and again creating that nice pedestrian walk up the hill, parking to the rear and hidden to the extent that we can. For those who were interested, this is a park that's about 2 tennis courts in size. So it's about 120 feet by 120 feet. Sometimes it's easier to imagine those. And for those who were interested in comparisons, it's similar in scale. These are both at the same scale to the small triangular park, Trinity Park, at down in the Florence area is the start. This is Main Street coming in, and that's Locust. So roughly about that size. So it's a nice amenity size. And we thought also for comparison we should look at what was planned there under the 2003 master plan. And what you see here is the roadway system coming up. This was Ford crossing in a previous location, which was south of the coach building. Parking in the back, and you can see really that the building is surrounded by roadways with a little parking in the back. So we felt like this was a nicer and better feel for the building, and would provide a nice amenity for the units that face onto that. The Ford Crossing Street, which is running east to west along here and ending at the coach building on this side, and a small cut-through park on this side. Again, looking into a little more detail. We're envisioning this being higher density. At the moment, we're showing townhouses. We've also done some studies where that might be something like smaller homes, like bungalows or something like that, but a higher density, again, creating a nice streetscape through there. This was a view, we did create some, they're a bit speculative, but they're views of what the streetscape might look like. And as you can see, we're suggesting that the buildings really front the street, that there be a small stoop and a front garden, and then the sidewalk, there'd be a walkable space, there'd be street trees to create a nice canopy over your head, and really to create a very nice feel ending. As you can see, this sort of building in the back is the coach building, so it ends on a nice vista of the old historic structure. And this is a view of the park, which is immediately to the south. So Ford Crossing was here, coach building is over here. This is a park that we saw as really central to the way the community could operate. We're seeing this as somewhat of a recreational park. Again, thinking about parks as what sort of uses could happen to them. We see this as kind of a recreational, active. We're showing at the moment, a tennis court, but we could imagine a number of different sports venues right there. Basketball, tennis court, something like that, some amenity space. It's ringed by houses on all sides, creating a nice park at the middle. These are those great big wonderful beech trees that have been existing for, I would guess, 80 to 100 years, and they create a really nice canopy for that park. Again, this is a view looking from the south side of the park, looking across. So you're seeing Moser coming along at this location, the homes in the back, and what we'd like to see as much as possible is the access ways to the townhomes in the back and hidden, and the homes really fronting onto the park and creating a nice, nice amenity there. Again, a scale comparison. This is the Agnes Fox Playground, which is over by, let's see, this is Maple? State Street. State Street, yes, sorry. And Hooker? And Route 5, okay, and Church Street. And you can see it's about the same size. This is about 1.5 acres, and this is about 1.6 acres. So we're envisioning quite an active use there. Again, from the 2003 master plan, the previous plan for that area, you can see the beech trees are trying to find their way in amongst the backyards of these homes, but really the whole area is turned into townhomes, and I believe these are threeplexes along here. The bungalow area, again, looking at that, the small lots with small homes along the west side of the site. The ones on this side of the street, we're trying to work a system where they come in and access via alleys so that the garages are behind the homes, and we think that can work well. And then the main street down here with the homes fronting onto it, creating a nice texture there. A walkway, as you can see, through the middle, connecting the park at the coach house around through to the main path around the site, as well as a small park space. There's a wonderful old oak tree right there. And rather than try and turn the corner with a lot and try and build a building there, it seemed to make more sense to keep that as a little bit of open space. This is a little closer view of that, emphasizing the landscaping, but again, you can see the walkway through. A little bit of a treatment here with some landscaping elements. Perhaps the buildings are pulled back a bit, so you create a nice space in the middle, and then this park up in the corner, which allows connections through to the coach building and around here. On the north side of the campus, this was seen as single-family homes, reducing the density as you get away from Prince Street, so that the higher density uses and the higher density housing types are down further, and then the lower densities are up closer towards where the natural landscape exists in the river way in the background here. We have planned around the North Employees Home a park space. And I think we have a better view of it there. Again, there's been some discussion that perhaps these be turned into artist lofts, and the notion that this might be a park that emphasizes some sort of arts, perhaps either objects of art in there or something that somehow relates to the arts that are going on here. And on this side is a slight variation of a sketch produced earlier, which shows the fountain and the notion that the existing fountain that was part of the old main structure, there was at the front door a fountain on the point of arrival, that be relocated to what is a quiet corner of the site and turned into a nice contemplative space for people who might want to go up there and remember what used to be up there. This location was selected by the members of the fountain subcommittee, I believe there, as the place that they thought would be most respectful to what they were trying to accomplish. This is a view looking from the north corner back into the park space, so you can see the park here, the roadway coming around. This is the North Employees Building at this location, and the home is just creating a nice backdrop for what is otherwise a nice public space. And as a comparison, this is a section of Northampton just beyond Smith College on Elm Street. This is Kensington, this is Washington, Maynard, I believe. And you can see the density of homes and the size of the lots is more or less consistent with this. What is interesting is, at the same scale, going from this street in the back to Elm Street, the number of park spaces we have here and here versus what is in there existing today, which is no parks. And so they're just straight street runs. So the scale of this space is quite a bit smaller than the scale of this neighborhood. And this was the shot of the 2003 master plan showing what had been planned in that area. And it's a little hard to see. These are the homes, these little yellow dots. And these are the private yards that are surrounding them. So they were fairly good-sized kind of estate lots. The open space in the middle presumably was a privately owned yard as opposed to a publicly held park. So in the balance, it seemed a good trade-off for the additional density for the public open spaces. And this is the master plan as it's evolved today. As Beth has been sure to mention, it is conceptual, so there's presumably a lot of development that'll happen. We'll just try to go a little faster on the open space again. Sort of zooming back to the macro level, this was the old main site originally. This is our site on the north campus and the south campus. Again, looking at some of the wonderful landscape elements that this plan is trying to preserve. And looking at how do we knit together the various open spaces? Well, the first thing is thinking about distances. The walk from Prince Street up to the top of the hill here, or up to the far end of the hill, is about 1/3 of a mile, and is about an 8 to 10 minute walk. These circles are showing a 5-minute radius walk, more or less 1/8 of a mile. So really you can see it's really quite walkable, the whole entire campus. This is showing the loop path, which runs around the entire site and connects both to the open space trailway network that runs along the river, as well as down into and amongst the southern portion of the campus. These purple and blue lines are showing the main cross axes this way and again up the old Village Hill Road. This slide highlights the parks, and we thought it would be useful to kind of pull the parks out and show them against the white background. But really we're trying to create a number of different parks. Each has its own character and feel. Each provides a nice network of spaces, and the trails really connect back and forth between these. So it's not one big space that's unused. It's a series of smaller spaces that help to frame the homes that we're doing here. Surrounded by this open space network, which is all of this space, which is preserved. We've tallied it up. It's about 5.5 acres of park that's being proposed, in addition to the almost 32 acres of space around the development, for a total of about 38 acres on the whole site of preserved open space. So it's really quite a extensive proposal for open space and park system. At the bottom here, you can see we've tallied up the multi-use pathways. There's about 2.7 miles, an additional 1.8 miles of sidewalks, gets you about 4.5 miles of walkable surface within that area. Now, residential units.
Yep.
Back to Beth now.
Okay. Next slide. So this is the tally of what's currently approved, which is 207 units. And as we've discussed before, there's room for 10% flexibility on that to bring us to 227 approved units. This tells us what's already been built, which is 26 single-family homes at Ice Pond, 33 apartments at Hilltop Apartment Buildings, 40 apartments in the Hillside Apartments, and then 12 townhomes in the Eastview, and 11 single families in the Morningside. That totals 122 units that have either already been built or are permitted to be built. That leaves us with 105 units left to be built. We subtract out the 4 units that are going to be located on Laurel Street, and that leaves us with 101 units left to be built on the north campus. We're proposing an additional 100 units, and that brings the total to be built to 201 units. Next slide, please. And this just shows you where those units have been built. Off slide is Ice Pond down the road here. These are the new hillside apartments. These are the 2 hilltop apartments here, the 12 townhomes, and the 11 single-family homes in this location here. Next slide. So if you tally up all the existing, you've got 122 units. On the concept plan, there's another 57 single-family houses. There's 25 bungalows proposed. There's 47 townhouses. There's 20 multifamily units proposed. There's 8 mixed-use units proposed. So in other words, above the commercial on the first floor, you have mixed-use units. There's 8 live-work units proposed in the North Employees Home. And then there's 2 units proposed in a 2-family dwelling. And that totals up to 167 units. If you add the 122 units to 167 units, you're looking at 289 units. The 227 is what we currently have approval to do, so you're looking at a difference between those 2 of 62 additional units. What we proposed in previous presentations were possible alternatives whereby we would have additional single-family houses, additional bungalows, additional townhouses, or additional multifamily units. There's 38 possible permutations of the types of units that you could have, and so we added those down here, and that comes up to 100 additional residential units. Next slide, please. So you can see this is the concept master plan, and that's where those 62 additional units are actually cited on the plan, leaving the 38 additional units that we're requesting for alternatives. Next slide. Okay, you can see here's just one alternative that we have showed you. Instead of having single-family homes in this central location, we might have bungalows in that central location. And really, it's based on the market demand for that kind of unit, and if we were to find that bungalows were extremely popular, that might be an alternative we would pursue. Here's the commercial tax revenue projections that we have been showing to the CAC all along. What you see at the top here is the 1999 estimate by TCB, and that has 101 light industrial square feet, 244,000 office square feet, 23,000 of mixed use, and a retail of 22,000. Subtotal of 390,000 square feet. TCB was projecting an assisted living facility of about 56,000 square feet. It totaled that all up, and it came out to 446,250 square feet of potential commercial development. And TCB, back in 1999, based on a tax rate of $15.05, predicted that the total revenue would be $449,230. In 2006, Mass Development updated this estimate from TCB, and we suggested that there would be 128,000 square feet of light industrial space, 129,000 square feet of office space, looks like 50,000 square feet of mixed use, 30,000 of retail, for a total of 337,000 square feet. But we predicted a much larger assisted living facility of 80,000 square feet based on the feedback that we were getting from the marketplace. Total square footage in 2006 was 417,000 square feet. Total revenues based on your tax rate then of $10.89 was $495,495. More recently, when we were having our discussion about Cole Morgan, we updated it in May 2008, and we were able to project 172,000 square feet of light industrial, 60 of office space, 15,000 of mixed use, 3,000 of retail, for a subtotal of 250,000 square feet. And we modified our assisted living just a little bit to be 75,000 square feet. So in May of this year, we were showing 325,000 square feet. Total revenue was $494,648. Then, as we've gone through this planning process, we have been able to identify additional square footage for commercial use. And 172,000 square feet in light industrial is consistent, but we were able to identify more office use, so we got that number up to 85,000 square feet. 9,000 square feet of mixed use, and about 20,000 square feet of retail, for a subtotal of 286. And then you add in this assisted living at 75,000 square feet. Total square footage is 361,000 square feet. Total revenue based on your current tax level of $11.20 is $541,240. So basically, we've gone up a little bit. Your tax rate has gone down previously, but we've gone up a bit because of the value of the buildings and the land has gone up. Next slide. And I just wanted to point out to you the ways we were able to pick up additional square footage. This is the May plan, and it shows the Cole Morgan footprint. It shows the office retail, Holtz Clark with its potential expansion, and a light industrial building of about 10,000 square feet here. And we have the potential office space here, and we have a mixed-use space here, as well as commercial space in the mail attendants. Next slide. What we did in looking at it further, we were able to extend the footprint of this office retail. We were able to extend the footprint of this office retail, and we were able to identify a new location for office retail across Village Hill Road from Lot 18 and put that there. We changed this mixed-use building into a completely commercial building. And then we added another mixed-use building to make up for that commercial space that had been over here. So through all of that, we were able to add about 36,000 square feet of additional commercial space through this North Campus planning process. Next slide. This is our job creation table and the permanent jobs created and retained over the 10-year period. Based on the light industrial of 172,000 square feet, we're looking at 137 jobs. Office of 85,000 square feet, we're looking at 188 jobs. Retail, 20,000 square feet, 40 jobs. Mixed use, 9,000 square feet, 30 jobs. And assisted living of 80 units will create about 52 jobs. So the total projection of jobs created, permanent jobs created, is 437 jobs. This is a projection based on formulas that are typically used, and we think that we will actually exceed that projection based on Cole Morgan coming to the campus and various other prospects that we are talking to at this point. There's also the full-time construction jobs created, and the commercial development construction jobs are 62 jobs. The North Campus residential development will create 95 jobs for a total of 157 construction jobs. Add to that 19 jobs in demolition and 30 jobs in abatement, and the total is just a little over 200. So those are our job projections. And I will turn it over to Dave Loring to talk to you about trip generation.
Good evening, I'm David Loring from Time Bond. We're a consulting engineering firm down in Westfield. And I've got just a couple of slides with some more numbers, so bear with me. And I'm going to just run through the trip generation. This is intended just a summary of the trip generation for the site to compare it to the MEPA projections back in 2003 to what the current conceptual master plan trip projections are. This analysis will be developed further with the MEPA filing where we'll get into distribution, but that's beyond tonight's discussion. If I'll read through these numbers. I know in the back of the room you probably can't read these, but this is the conceptual master plan comparison. What we did was did a comparison between residential development, and then the next one we'll talk about commercial development. We looked at the 2003 MIPA FEIR, which had a total of 207 residential units, which Beth ran through that count just a few moments ago, to the 2008 conceptual plan, where we have 327 units. The next slide. Here these are the basis for our trip generation rates. We looked at the commercial, and under the 2003 MIPA FEIR, which is the final environmental impact report, we had the 476,000 square feet of development, which we just spoke of. And under the 2008 conceptual master plan, we have the 361,000 square feet. And that just breaks it down into the individual categories which we use to develop the trip generation. Next slide. Then looking at the comparison, we have the trip generation for the residential traffic. The 2003 MIPA filing projected a total of 1,814 vehicle trips for the residential single-family homes, townhouses, and apartments. Under the 2008 conceptual master plan, which had the the full build-out that we just saw on the previous slide, we're showing 2,657 vehicle trips. So we're increasing approximately 800 vehicle trips on the residential side.
For what? I'm sorry.
We're gonna
Total.
we're gonna have time for questions, so let's.
The numbers we're looking at here are the total vehicle trips generated on the residential component for the new master plan
Per day.
per day.
We're gonna have-
Average daily trips.
I'm gonna give you time to ask as many questions as you need, too, so.
The next slide. We then looked at the commercial ADT, that's average daily trips. The 2003 MIPA filing had 7,002 average daily trips generated from the site. The 2008 conceptual master plan shows a reduction of almost half, dropping to 3,760 average daily trips. These trips were based on ITE's 6th generation, that's the Institute of Traffic Engineers trip generation data. It's a national professional organization that publishes trip generation data. We use the same trip generation data that was originally used, so that we're comparing apples to apples. Then the final slide just gives us the total comparison. The original master plan under the MIPA FEIR was 8,816 average daily trips. The 2008 conceptual plan shows a drop of about 30% to 6,417 average daily trips. So, in summary, under the new conceptual master plan, we're seeing the average daily trips drop approximately 30% due to the reduction in commercial development. Residential comes up, commercial drops, but it results in an overall net loss in traffic generated from the site.
Okay, something that's, yeah, that's the end of the slides.
Yes,
You want to
yes.
turn the lights on? And then, Mr. Fine, you can present it to me.
So I'm just going to talk about population projections a little bit if I could. We prepared population projections for the school committee as part of the comprehensive planning effort. That was for the whole city, trying to figure out what's the city's population likely to be in the future. We then did an extract for the state hospital, and this is less about projections and more about taking current occupancy for housing units in Northampton and assigning them to the units here. So what we looked at just quickly is how many people live per housing unit in Northampton. You can take housing units and divide them by housing type. How many people live in each dwelling unit in the city, how many people live in each single-family home, how many people live in each suburban single-family home, in each urban single-family home. They're all very different. So what we did is we assigned the numbers based on the kind of units that are being developed up at the state hospital. I'll jump to the bottom line and then break this down a little bit more. But we project a total population state hospital redevelopment at the North Campus. So this does not look at the ice pond, and does not look at the assisted living residents, but just the units that we're talking about here, of 538 people. Of that 538 people, 52 would be in K through 12, that is school-age children. The basis for that is we looked at single-family homes, and looking around the city, the average came out with about 2.4 residents per dwelling unit. That's substantially more residents than we have in similar neighborhoods in the city. If you look at all the similar neighborhoods, which they were showing in the slides, that is the area off Elm Street, Ward 3, Ward 4, our average dwelling unit, average residents per dwelling unit is substantially less than this. But our feeling was, what we found is small units tend to be relatively few people per dwelling unit, but newer construction tends to be more people per dwelling unit. So we sort of found a medium point between brand new suburban housing, where we have larger family sizes, and small lots with small units. Townhouses likewise, we looked at other townhouse projects in town, and looked at what's the average right there, and apartments the same thing. One of the things we factored in is the number of units that are tax credits, that is the so-called affordable units. And we looked at all the other tax credit projects in Northampton, and again sort of said, these are smaller units, smaller bedrooms, and we're able to look at what's the average family size in each of those units. So this is up on our website. I know you can't all see the numbers now, but if anyone wants to see it, you can see them there. There's two tables that are here. One's the assessment for the state hospital itself, which I just read the numbers for. And then, so you see where we took the raw numbers from. We broke this down to average family size, average household size citywide, and single-family homes, just for neighborhoods near downtown, newer suburban neighborhoods, which was by far the largest number of both school-age children and people generally, older suburban neighborhoods like the area between Florence Road and Ryan Road, the whole Ryan Road school area, multifamily homes, and smaller affordable housing projects.
Okay, so that's the whole presentation, I think, right? You get everything that you wanted to present. So we're going to begin with anybody who's here who wants to ask any questions or make any comments, and I'm going to ask people to make sure that they give other people a chance to talk. But if you have any questions of the mass development or any of the presenters, if you have any comments that you'd like to make to the CAC, you're welcome to do that. And it's interactive. If you have a question, they're going to answer it. So to the best of their ability, or they're going to tell you how they find the answer out. So I'm going to ask, I think did people sign up, Green, or? No. So just step up and sign in. Anybody who wants to step up and speak, just go right ahead. Could you write down your name and address, though, so that Green can keep track of who spoke?
Well, I have a very quick question. What's trip generation? Is that from if you go from North Campus to South Campus, or you drive downtown? What does it mean? Every time anyone drives in,
Go for it.
When we talk of trip generation, we mean a single vehicle trip from a property. A trip is just one motor vehicle trip from a property or a parcel.
But even though you stay within the development, it's a trip generation.
It's a trip.
Okay.
Does that mean to the development also? From
That would be a separate trip.
Could you just explain, I think what's important, so there's standards in the industry that you use, right? And what are they measuring? How do they create that measure? Could you just explain that a little bit?
These are based on, as I mentioned earlier, the Institute of Transportation Engineers publishes a couple of very big, large volumes. And what they do is traffic studies across the country, set out traffic counters for various land uses, retail stores, residential housing, apartment housing, townhouses, every type of land use essentially. And then they take the data based on the size or the square footage, the number of units, and they collect this data and then they put it back in the form of tables so that for a residential house, we know that a residential house generates 10 vehicle trips per day. That's 10 vehicles in or out combined per unit of residential housing. If it's an apartment, it's a slightly lower number. It's closer to 9 vehicle trips. If it's commercial retail space, that number jumps up dramatically depending on the size of the building. So,
Is that helpful? Yeah. And just identify who you are, and to the public too, so they know to speak.
Joel Russell. I'm a professional land use planner and a land use attorney. I live in Northampton. And I'm also chairman of the Northampton Design Forum, which was formed over the past year, concerned for improving urban design. And we're trying to work constructively with local boards and local government and developers. A couple quick questions, and then I wanted to make a couple quick questions for the developers and a couple comments I want to make to the CAC. Can everybody hear me? A question on trip generation was, cameras, well, I'm talking did you take account in your trip generation differences between the national aggregated statistics that you're based upon and the character of this development, which, at least in theory, you would think would generate more walking trips? The goal of the city here is to have a walking community. People might walk to work, might walk to more things. Would that affect your trip generation estimates?
For the purpose of what you saw tonight, the internal capture rate, or people walking from one facility to another, was not included. What we were trying to do is compare the data to what was published before, so that there weren't questions that we were trying to massage the data one way or another. When you actually get into the individual trip distribution, that's where we begin to account for internal counts where you may be walking from one facility to another. And that will, of course, drop that number. So the answer is no, it's not been accounted for in the data that you saw tonight, but it wasn't accounted for in the original data. So we were trying to compare the same numbers.
Yeah, no, I understand wanting to keep apples to apples, but I think one of our goals as a community, as I understand it, is to make this as much of a walking village as possible, which has a lot of benefits. For one thing, it really does capture a lot of what the sustainability process we've been going through here is all about. And so I would hope that the more effective this development is as a walking community, the less traffic it should generate. But that will depend on the quality of its design. And I want to make a couple comments to the CAC about that. I had one other question, which has to do with the location of the commercial development and the market support for it. In my experience, commercial development works much better when it's along a trafficked corridor rather than internal to the site. And I was just wondering, A, why all of the commercial development, or virtually all of it, is up internal to the site, and whether you have what kind of market basis you have for determining what level it is. In other words, why should we believe that whatever level of commercial development you say can happen there actually would have the market support for it, particularly if it's not along the road? I don't know if we
Well, I can answer that question. And you can see on here that what we've done is we've concentrated the commercial development on Route 66 and the area right off Route 66 on Village Hill Road, so that you have that office space. This doesn't work anymore? It does. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. So we've created an opportunity for office space here, that's right on Route 66. We've created another opportunity for office retail space here, which is on 66 and the corner of Village Hill Road. And we've had a good response from the market on this. We've had many prospects inquire about this space. Based on our level of inquiry on this, we thought it would be better to double load that corridor, and so this creates an opportunity over here for some more commercial space. Our plan is to reuse this building. That's not an easy sell, but it's something that's important to the CAC, to the city, that we preserve as much as possible. And so we've been marketing that for office space. Again, right across from that, still a little further in from Route 66, but still accessible, is an area for perhaps retail on the first floor and office on the space, the several floors above. Here, less of an opportunity, so we've created a mixed-use building.
Well, what do you mean by mixed-use building?
First floor, either retail or office, and the stories above that would be housing. So what we've tried to do is to maximize the opportunities on this site for commercial development that are realistic, and also keeping in mind that we don't want to compete with the downtown. We want to have sufficient retail for on-site amenity, but not anything that would be a retail destination. And we think that there are a number of very marketable office opportunities on this site. So that was the thinking behind the commercial development.
Okay, well, thank you. I could just take a couple of minutes to address the CAC, sort of putting more of the design concern on. I think we've had a lot of information presented tonight. I would like to encourage us as a community and you as an advisory committee to take a deep breath and step back and say, here's an opportunity. You know, the market in general, the real estate market is not active anywhere in the country right now. This is an opportunity to step back and make the most of the opportunity this site presents. The Northampton Design Forum, as most of you know, sponsored a week-long charrette in September with the Notre Dame University Graduate Urban Design Studio, and they studied a number of locations in the city and paid particular attention to this site. And they just today actually posted on the website that they have up an alternative plan that I think has a lot of very interesting characteristics. And I think, I'm not saying, you know, one or the other plan should be used, but I think it ought to be taken into consideration. And I think when you look at what they have done, in terms of urban design, they have made a conscious effort to shape spaces in a way that I don't think this plan begins to do. And given that it seems to me there's really no rush to an approval, that it would be a good idea to take some time, look at this plan carefully. There's a lot to look at here, and you know, it took an hour just to present it. It's going to take a long time to fully understand it. And I think it would be helpful to compare what the Notre Dame studio has presented, just to see another approach and see what can we do with this site. Also, when the south, you know, we're looking at the north and south as separate entities, and they're not. The south campus, now that there is Paul Morgan there, that's a game changer for the whole plan. Whether it's a good or bad thing, if it's going to be there, we have to consider how it affects the design of the entire site. And it creates some significant opportunities, because you're going to have a large daytime population that's working there. So I would just encourage us to take time for you to not feel any pressure to make a decision about this, and to also hear from the community about this. I mean, you know, the developers and their consultants have spent a lot of time on the plan. You know, you're going to need to spend time on it, and I hope that you'll involve the community and the planning board, which ultimately is going to have to be reviewing this, so that we can have a collaborative process and not feel like there's you know, an incredible time pressure to get it done. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to hear from all the public, and then we're going to hear from the board. We're going to go to the CAC after. Just going to have, yeah.
My name is John Sinton. I live in Florence, and I'd just like to support what Joel said. And I would like to thank the planning board as well for reconsidering this whole problem. The only thing I'd like to add to Joel is that the Notre Dame group will be here again on December 13th. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
At the senior center?
No, at the high school.
At the high school, at Northampton.
At 2:30.
At 2:30, and they will give their final presentation, and we invite you all there, and we hope to see you there, and let's open it up and think about this. Design is really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Just line up. I'm not going to call them.
All right. I'm Barbara
We're
Blumenthal.
self-governing people, you
Okay.
know.
I'm Barbara Blumenthal. I live at 39 Chapel Street. And there were just a couple of comments I wanted to make as I saw this presentation, because I've been hanging around this place for a long time. And one of the things that Beth Murphy said that struck me at the beginning of the presentation was that she was saying that this was a presentation mainly to indicate what it would be like to live in Village Hill. And I live right next to Village Hill. And I've walked in all these trails for years. I've been watching the new neighborhood develop. And I think that what's there so far, it's very walkable, it's very nice. But I think that one of the things that the CAC, a very important thing that the CAC has to consider, is not just what Village Hill will be, but what it's going to be like to live next to Village Hill. And I think it's more than just traffic counts. And there's just a lot of things that I hope that the CAC, and obviously after that, the planning board will also consider. And one of the things that was new in the presentation tonight was comparing with the former master plans. And I think what struck me in looking at them, particularly in the one where there, I'm sorry, I can't remember who showed this part, but where we saw the big beech trees, and the comment was made that, oh, they're just kind of crammed in. I think in the older plan, and now they're accommodated in this park. And what struck me about that is that it means to me that, I mean, it just brings home my thought that the former master plans never tried to adapt or accommodate existing, I mean, it seems even existing landscape or buildings. And now that the historic buildings are gone, and I'm not going to reopen that, but I still think, I mean, when I walk around that site, I still think, and I understand there were market forces at work, but I still think it's a shame that so many of the historic buildings were gone. But it seems now that the plans are finally, you know, all of a sudden they're trying to accommodate what's there. Whereas before, it seems like there was no accommodation to buildings or the natural surroundings, because it seemed to me originally if trees were in the way of this plan, which clearly was conceptual, they just weren't considered. So I think that may be all I have to say. But, and also the comparisons with, say, Florence Center or other parts of Northampton, I'm not sure how valuable they are. I mean, they do give you a sense of what the density is, but I think just because those densities exist in other parts of the city, it doesn't mean they're necessarily the right density or the right plan for Village Hill.
Thank you.
My name is, excuse me, Barbara Kircher. I'm the president of the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Western Mass. Beth talked earlier about community connectedness, and it occurred to me that as I've been reading some of the documents, I've seen several references to a community facility, but I haven't seen any reference to a community facility tonight in any of these slides. I think a community facility is important. A building, a place that can be used for meetings, can be used for a parent-child center, can be used for small fundraisers, can be used for small dinners somewhere on the campus. And I'm concerned that that may be one of the things to go in the rush to build. So my other request is that the committee look at this and form a subcommittee. Get it working. It looks like there perhaps is going to be some time here where you will have some time to get a subcommittee underway with the chairman, chairperson, and some committee members and begin to consider this. Otherwise, I think it's going to be an opportunity that we should not let go. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
My name's Christina Peterson, and I live in Northampton. And first of all, I want to apologize for having my head in the sand on this project for so long. I'm waking up now that it's become a reality, and I would just like to have some clarification. One is, all we're speaking about tonight is the 100 additional units of housing, correct? We're not talking about Morgan?
Correct.
Okay. And also, I'm wondering, how does this get done? Do you build all these houses and then wait for people to buy them, or do you build, 5 bungalows and have people sign up to purchase those and then build 5 more?
Yeah, this is a long-term master plan,
Okay.
and so it's market-driven, so that these units will only get built out as developers come forward and believe that they can build the units and sell them to the market.
Okay.
So we want to look long-term down the road and make sure that everything fits together. That's why we're planning all the units at once.
Okay. So I I came here to complain about the 100 extra units, but you have taken my breath away with the cars. I can't believe that you're estimating, what is it, 5,400 trips in and out of the development? Full disclosure here, I live about a mile from the state hospital and I use those roads all the time. And I don't know if you guys pull up to the intersection of West Street and Main Street between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock p.m., but it's already impossible. And so I really encourage you to step back, take some time. If you don't have to vote on this tonight, please don't. And please try to address the traffic, because right now, those of us who use that intersection know that already it needs to be a double lane all the way back to the Smith College parking garage during that time of day. And you know, if we're going to have all these extra trips, then it's going to be a real adventure using that intersection. So thank you for providing this forum. I really look forward to having some words about the Cole Morgan plant, because I feel like that's the largest betrayal of this initial project, which was, you know, supposed to be more of a village. And the Cole Morgan project looks more like an industrial park, so I'll keep my ear open for when I can comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eileen Hirsch, and I've lived here for almost 20
Pardon me?
years. Eileen Hirsch, I've lived here for almost 20 years. And I have to, I just want to say I'm disappointed that we're here tonight talking about adding on another 100 units. I've been to many meetings over the years, on and off, about this project. And for years, we've been talking about 207 units, 207 units. It's going to be a village. Then, you know, things started to change, the Cole Morgan, and then it seems like in a very short period of time, we want to push another 100 units. And I think you better think long and hard, because initially this was going to be staged. We were going to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Let's see how it goes. Let's see if the infrastructure can handle it. Let's do it. When we talk about smart growth, that's smart growth. Okay. I don't think this is smart. And I know it's ultimately your decision. I know the mayor is between a rock and a hard place financially. So, but studies have shown that businesses is what bring money into a town, not more housing. Housing utilizes resources. We need affordable housing. Let's go with the 207. Let's see how that goes. You know, I'm one person that went up there way before this all started, this development, and it was beautiful the way it was. Now, the fellow who did the architectural, you know, I can't count how many times he said the word nice. I mean, if I could have counted. And I understand why you want to keep it positive. Everybody that spoke, you know, about the traffic, you probably don't live here. But if you live here, you understand that we have a traffic problem right now. So I just want you to really think about that. And I have 3 boys. I can't tell you how many times I've traveled out of town for soccer practices, baseball practices. We can't get fields. We have that field across the street from the development. My sons can't play in that field. Very limited access. We are doing a lot of driving, us people with kids are doing a lot of driving out of town to take our kids to practices. When you tell me to imagine a tennis court, I don't want to imagine. If I was mayor of this town, I'd say, build it. And I'd say, build this and build that. And I'd make it a place where if you're going to ask the town to take this on, the traffic. I mean, you have Tom Cleveland. We're talking about carbon footprint here. And I want to hear more green talk. And if you talk about carbon footprint and driving, let's put some fields up there so we're not driving down 91 and driving into Hadley. And if I was the mayor, I'd say, we're not going to take this on unless you give us something. So I just want you to, and I think there's nothing wrong with doing things slowly and in stages. I just think, what's the matter with that? At least we can kind of say, okay, there's, and we talk about what's built, but people aren't living there yet. So we really haven't dealt with even a minutia of what the traffic's going to be like. So, this is a great town. Let's not ruin it.
Thank you.
My name's Steve Boos. I'm renting in Northampton and thinking of buying a house here, so perhaps a unique point of view. And I smile every time you talk about traffic because I just moved here from DC. So, but with that in mind, there's a few reasons why we haven't committed to a house here, and I think that those reasons are important. First has to do with this question of planning. I agree. I think it's really great not to have estate homes up there because I know what estate homes are like, and I think that you don't need more expensive homes. If your homes weren't too expensive, I already would have bought one. So I like the idea that the houses are more affordable, and I think that's a great thing. But you talk about bringing up people with mixed socioeconomic backgrounds, and then you plunk them into little blocks where they're all living on top of each other. And, you know, I got your balkanized, wealthier people here, somewhat less over here, and the way it fits together, it's not marble, it's chunks, it's blocks, and that's given me some pause. And then the second thing that's given me some pause is uncertainty, because if I were to buy one of these houses that are up for sale now, I don't know what's going to be across the street. And every time I ask a question, I hear, oh, the market will determine. Well, you know, the word market isn't exactly glowing right now. The word market looks pretty bad. So, and then that whole concept, I understand that there's realities about the market and you can't just build it and they will come. You have to build what they want. But this plan, as dense as it is based on an expansion of 62 units. And yet you're asking for approval for 100. Okay, which is a lot more than 62. I mean, that's a lot of flexibility. And I would really hesitate to see what this would look like with 100 units up there. And so I think that if we're going to move forward, I would like to see some limits drawn around what's going to go in there. I'd like to see more than one master plan. If you're talking about letting the market determine, I've seen one new version this evening with the bungalows. But I'd like to know kind of what the limits around it are. If we're going to approve something, it'd be nice if we knew what we were approving and it wasn't a number, but was actually a plan or perhaps even a vision.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Susan Ford. I'm on the Northampton Tree Committee. I have a list that was prepared by Mass Development's arborist or an arborist hired by me way back at the beginning. And on this list there are all the trees that were there and 35, I believe, trees that were identified as specimen trees, meaning big, old, healthy trees. I have a couple questions about these trees. When I looked at some of the slides, are they all there still, or most of them? And have they been marked in some way so that people who are working up there know what they are?
They've all been tagged, yes, but they are also existing on all our plans. So that as we are drawing roads or subdivisions or whatever, all those trees are in the plan from the start.
Right, I've seen them on the plan, but my concern is that a random person driving a backhoe might not realize if they're not marked other than the little plastic.
No, there are protection measures taken for these trees at the beginning of any construction.
Then when I look at these plans for the future, the park with the beech trees, the possible additional houses, the little pocket park where the oak tree is, are there very definite protection plans in place? For example, the sidewalks that I saw on the plan and a tennis court or some basketball court, all of that was in amongst the beech trees. Beech trees get real pouty if their roots are developed on a nest with. So I
Right, and our commitment is to preserve all the specimen trees, and this goes back to being a concept plan. The actual distances haven't been measured, and so when we go out in the field and measure them, things are going to shift around. Lots may get smaller, park area may expand, but it's all to preserve those trees.
Okay, because the houses back in there, the trees are sort of growing around the houses, but chaos reigns when buildings are built. Trees
Right.
don't always get.
We have an arborist on board, and we've been lectured as to exactly the kind of measures that we have to take.
Thank you.
My name is Deb Jacobs. I live in Leeds, and Eileen Hirsch was talking about wanting soccer fields. And I just also like to say that one of the things that I love most about what I was able to give my child was time to go out in the woods. And unfortunately, she did get in the river a bit more than I was aware of at the time. But I think that it's really important to also provide that, and not just with paved surfaces that wind in amongst the trees. I'm also on the tree committee, and I don't think you've been lectured quite enough about the trees, because when I was up there, the street trees had volcano mulch, which went way up too high. It causes the bark to deteriorate and rot. Mice get in there. And I would, in terms of beech trees, I would give you the example of the copper beech that's at the Lilly Library. There was an addition put on the Lilly, and there was also work done on the building, the community Florence Civic Building. And if you look at the crown of that tree, you'll see that it's really died back, and the tree is in decline. And I think you have to be much more careful. I see you laughing over there, Brandy.
Oh.
And I just think that you really need to be even more careful than you are, because they are beautiful trees. Some of your street trees are starting to die. I don't know what from, but the bark is starting to come away on them. So it's also something you need to take a look at. Trees are really wonderful, but you can't just put them in the ground and they don't just grow. So you've got a real treasure up there. The woods are just really wonderful to walk through. And I hope that you're able to preserve as much of it as you possibly can. Thank you.
I'm Barry Hirsch. We got the wonderful $500,000 tax revenue we're going to get. I'm sure our plan to spend that. But there must be some other calculation about how much it costs the city. You know, the sewage, the police, the fire, the schools, the pollution, the garbage dump. Where's that number? I didn't hear that calculation about the cost. And that's obviously just as important as how much we're going to get on the project. Is there a number out there for what it costs the city to take care of all these people?
If we have 52 kids in the schools, if Wayne's numbers right, it's about, on the city's time, about $350,000 of that.
Kids.
That's about that, right.
Police,
It's another
fire.
when we finish, it's another plow route, which is about $20,000 a winter. The police and fire, quite frankly, is not an additional huge sum because it's within the downtown range, so it actually wouldn't necessitate adding anybody else. Sewer and water are paid for by the ratepayers, so people who can do the sewer and water, they pay for that themselves. So I think there's a net on this that's pretty good when I look at it.
My name's Darrell LaFleur. I live on South Street, one of the direct connector routes. And I think I'll follow up on that gentleman's question. Because Cole Morgan already pays property taxes to the city. So moving that over to the Hospital Hill site, Village Hill, excuse me, and based on those calculations, I'd be interested in what that would net. If you're saying $370 for kids and plowing, and then a certain percentage of that hospital, or excuse me, Village Hill tax revenue of $541,000. We're already receiving some of that. So it'd be interesting to hear what that calculation would be. And in that vein, I think it would be interesting for the public to learn, as the project moves forward, where we are on the thermometer of the goal. What are we generating in property taxes today? We have a certain number of units that have already been constructed. So it'd be interesting for us to know as that plays out as we go each year, how that figure is increasing or decreasing. I'd like to ask, because this was presented tonight, Beth Murphy began the evening speaking about the space that's permanently protected. I was under the impression that there is a 99-year restriction on that property. And that probably none of us will be here at that time. But my ancestors came to Northampton about 140, 150 years ago. So it's conceivable that some of us will have ancestors here 100 years from now. Is it permanent, or is it 99 years? What is the, how does that
I think
work?
that's a good question, Darrell, and I think it's a legal question. I think you're not allowed to tie anything down for more than 99 years is the problem.
Well, if you're talking about the USDA land, that may be permanent, but typically for most state projects, I understand it's 99 years. But I'd have to research.
I think there's some legal issues there. It's deeded to the Department of Food and Ag, the use of agricultural land, in the custody of the Smith Vocational School.
But it's zoned as an overlay, so as long as the city does not change the zoning of it, it will remain Farms, Fields, and Rivers overlay, which is permanent unless the city makes a change.
And then Wayne has something else.
We have a conservation restriction, agricultural preservation restriction on that land, so it's permanently protected. The 99 years, you're probably remembering, is Smith Vocational has 99 lease to use it. So Smith might leave and a different farmer would come in. But the land itself is preserved forever, regardless of who the farmer is.
What was that again? Why is that?
The land was transferred to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Food and Ag, and so under Article 90, the amendments to the Constitution, Article 97, it can only be sold by 2/3 vote of the state legislature. In addition, the city was given by legislation what's called an agricultural preservation restriction, so the city now holds an interest in the property. So even if a 2/3 vote of the state legislature voted to sell the property, the city council would have to agree and find equivalent land, new land of equivalent ecological and financial value. So it's basically as forever as it's legally to do.
And the 99-year was that they can't give Smith Voc a lease for any longer than that under the law.
So what I'm hearing is that it is possible, way out from now time-wise, that it could be used for something else.
No.
All the cars, the council.
A different farmer could use it, but it has to preserve its open space.
But if the legislature decided on their own volition to vote for
Right.
2/3, and the city council 100 years from now decided they didn't want to hold the APR anymore, that's true. We have tied it up the best we can with the legal tools that are available to us today. There's no other legal tools available to tie it any further. That's the best we can do about it. Tell people 100 years from now what to do.
So when we hear it's permanently protected, it's pretty complex, the explanation of how that.
I think the simple answer is it is permanently protected to the extent it can be permanently protected under law today.
Right.
It's better protected than any state park, because a state park requires just a 2/3 vote. We, in putting the restrictions on it, have said, basically everyone in the Commonwealth has to agree to sell it, so.
And under that APR, doesn't the city have a right of first refusal?
If they decide
If it
to
were
sell
ever
it.
to try to sell it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Regarding traffic, the traffic light that's been planned for Earl and Route 10, does anyone have a status on that? I know it's been approved. I know at one point we heard it was at the 25% design stage. Earl Street is being reconstructed presently.
It's part of that project. It was met warrant for building as part of that project.
Do you have any idea on the time frame?
Yeah, because they reached the end of this construction season, it'll come in next construction season.
So by the end of 2009?
Yes.
Beth Murphy mentioned in passing that the idea of the site was to not, one of the ideas of the site was to not compete with downtown. And I can understand that reasoning. We're talking about the commercial space, mixed-use space. Does that leave room for things, I'm making some presumptions that it does, for say like a convenience store or a coffee shop? Because it seems to me reducing the number of trips off of the site, that would be important for some people that want to, whether it's a gas station or a convenience store, get a cup of coffee or a sandwich. Are those the type of uses that we're talking about in the mixed uses?
Yeah, we're talking about retail that would primarily be used by people living and working on site. And so that is the kind of retail that would prevent them from getting in their cars. But what we don't want is the kind of retail that attracts people from other parts of the city to come to the site, because then that creates stress.
Right. So there could be just some coffee shops.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
I know people have already asked about trees. The parks that have been shown, making a presumption that those are going to be maintained by the city.
No, there's not a presumption. I think there's a discussion to be had about that.
So
could be maintained by a homeowner association, could be maintained by the city. There hasn't been a discussion.
So that's an open question. And if they were to be maintained by the city,
some of that tax revenue.
right, some of the costs here that were put out for the kids and the plowing, there would be something added there. Has anyone done any kind of a analysis on what the proposals for the new housing will do to current property values in the city? Has anyone looked at that at all? The equity that people have in their homes right now. I'm sure you're all aware of the mortgage crisis throughout the country. We're seeing values dropping. The other day, I think Joan Seraphin said at the city council meeting that property values are holding steady in Northampton. Has anyone looked at that at all?
Your questions really are to the developer, and if you're asking that for the CAC, we can bring up that question when we have our discussion. Ask the developer that. Is that something that you looked at?
Again, because this is market driven, we don't expect it to be developed in the current market conditions. So it will build out over time. As the rest of Northampton goes, so goes Village Hill.
So presently there isn't any, you don't have any calculations that you've done. Okay. Finally,
I'm trying to be cognizant of time. I know at least one other person that wanted to speak.
I will end.
It sounded like you just said finally, so why don't you do
finally, yes, finally. I'm again presuming that home occupations will be allowed on the site by special permit as they are elsewhere in the city.
Zone the same as the rest of the city.
So that would be permissible. So as far as other uses of the property,
Actually more permissive in our neighborhood.
more permissive, so that can happen. And I would all like to end on a positive note, that I'm encouraged by seeing the addition of the commercial component off of Route 66, as far as allowing for more walkability and live and work in the same area. I like the idea of the bungalows going up north there. I've been very concerned about the traffic living on South Street, so the traffic light I think will help that. And if these figures that you're presenting tonight turn out to be true, I'm pretty happy that the traffic will be reduced.
Thank you very much. I know I saw at least one other person, two other people, so three other people.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Wright. Just a couple of things for you. First, to answer Susan's question, experientially about the tree activities up there. We've been involved in planning up there for about 16 months and under construction for 9. And the level of care, I think, is best represented represented if you go behind 39 Olander Drive, the corner of that lot between the bike path and that home is one of the beech trees. And no tires have driven under the canopy of that tree. And that's really the best definition you can give to the protection of it, the drip line of the copper beech. So there's been no root compaction at all. And that's the standard that we've been asked to live within. It's monitored closely, and where Olander Drive now ends, earlier plans showed a bend to the right and down the hill. One of the reasons it won't go there is there's a cluster of beech trees there. So I think that they are the sacred cows and children and grandmothers and ancestors that are really regarded that way in this planning process with each of the engineers and landscape architects that we've been exposed to up there. So I think that's important to know. They really are part of their natural treasures, and every effort is made to maintain them. So I wanted to offer that. Just a couple of other comments. I think that having a master plan and one that is flexible is very important. Now it's no news to you that we've made a significant and we think courageous investment in moving forward at Village Hill. We believe in the vision of it, but at the moment there are 3 market rate residences up there. Whatever the tipping point is, that's not it. And the process of getting to the point where there is enough housing there, enough flexibility of housing, enough types of housing, so that it will support the commercial underpinnings, the community services from a commercial standpoint, is very important. And it's not something that really can wait, because people live there now, and people will continue to live there. They will make decisions based on what the trajectory is. So that I think waiting, there's been a lot of planning done for the last 22, 24 years, and whatever planning needs to be done certainly should be done. But I think the world around us, and 50%, by all the marketing research, 50% of the people who will come to live here do not now live in Northampton. They need to know that we have made up our minds about how we're going to do this, and have both the vision and the stamina to carry it out.
Yeah, I saw some of the people in the back. But... Yeah, go ahead. That woman right there, yeah.
You decided to go say something else.
No. He's
just looks that way all the time.
I'm Jonathan Wright from Wright Builders, who were mentioned earlier. 13 lots, 11 lots on the side of Olander Drive, some of which we have purchased and the others which we have under contract. And we're in the process of $3.4 million.
Hi, I'm Joanne Turcott, and I'm concerned about, I wanted to know how big the park or area that's dedicated to the fountain will be. I was over there this evening to see the marker that's been placed where the fountain is in theory supposed to go. And it doesn't look like a lot of space has been put there. I mean, not put there, but you know what I mean.
Do you have that number? All right, we can tell you acres. It's and maybe we can flip to that.
To that page, sure.
Flip to that page.
If where the marker is, if that were symbolic of where the fountain would be, I don't know that you'd want it to be that close to the street.
No, and that's exactly, again, we come back to the idea that this is a concept master plan. What we're going to do is then take that concept, and then they're going to take the principles of design of what this memorial park should look like, and they'll move the fountain to the most appropriate location. And in fact, in this most recent presentation, see that Westview Park, that's the fountain park location, and that's about 0.6 of an acre. But what they'll do, and what they have started to do, is to move the park a little further in, so it's a little further away from the road, closer to the North Employees Home. So they'll keep developing that concept, and we'll do that in interaction with the Memorialization Committee and the CAC to make sure that we get it right.
Like, I guess I'm sort of struck too by the total lack of any kind of mention function of any of the former buildings or anything, you know, like none of the streets are named after any of the buildings that used to be there or people that were important people there at one time. I don't know, I don't know. I understand Ford Crossing, I get that one, but some of the other ones are these people that somebody knew, or how did they come up with these street names? Like, you know.
One over here, one here.
Well, you know, because the Fountain Project is a commemorative thing, and it's, and I, you know, I think it's wonderful that, you know, I love those peach trees, and I think that part is great. But what about what used to be there?
There has been some other conversation about other ways to memorialize, and I think there probably will be further conversation.
Well, I've heard about the plaques, and that are going up around the city, and that there will be some also on the hill. I have heard about, you know, there's a possibility of some, I guess somebody is writing a book. That's all really great, but those are not location bound. And you know, you were talking about not wanting people to make trips from town to the hill. And I thought, well, how strange, because, I mean, I don't know, I see a business opportunity in the creation of something that also can commemorate the former hospital. And I don't really understand why it seems like there's sort of been an effort to sort of just like take hospital or everything and related to that sort of out of this whole thing. So, I don't know, I guess I was thinking in terms of trying to raise money for a museum. And, you know, there are grants out there that can be obtained, and that would be a great showcase for artist work. We talked about the North Employees Building as being an artist's loft or whatever. Or, you know, that area, that park having sort of some sort of artistic theme. Why can't that incorporate the hospital? I mean, there are so many artists who have depicted that land in so many different ways. And I don't know that there's any place where they've been able to really display that work. You know, I don't know if there's a lot of openness for that kind of thing. You know, I'm surprised that NAMI hasn't said anything about this. You know, there should be something more about that hospital. And you know, in talking to some of the former employees there, it's come to my attention that, and I actually remember this from when I was a kid. There were a lot of people, a lot of patients at that hospital who actually worked in town, and they contributed a great deal for $1 a week to the development of Northampton. And we're talking over 100 years. As long as those beech trees have been there, there were state hospital patients there, and there were people who were community members who participated in the community. They have a cemetery that nobody knows where it is, except for the dog walkers and a few other people who have figured it out.
Memorial.
There is a memorial bench there, but I have to tell you, I've almost never met anybody. You know, generally when I tell people there is a memorial bench, they go, "Where is it?" I didn't know that.
There is a group that's working on memorialization. I don't know if they're going to be meeting anymore, but you're welcome to join them.
Well, I do join them, and I think I drive them insane, but I'm concerned because when all these houses get built and all this land is committed to housing and whatnot, then that sort of negates the possibility of, you know, if we should ever come up with the funds for a museum and we want to put it up there.
I think the definition of "we" is the question. If there is a group of people who want to do a museum, there are buildings, you know, the coach houses, nobody's bought the coach house yet, nobody's bought other buildings.
Well, I think there might be people who are interested in that if they thought that
they should come
you were interested and Northampton was interested.
They need to come together with a business plan that makes sense.
Well, it would be nice to know publicly that the city would support such an endeavor.
I think we've been supportive of every memorialization that's come along, but it has to work. So.
I mean, I'm not trying to criticize.
Yeah,
I'm just
I'm
have a
aware.
hope.
Yeah, I hear that. And there's other people that want to speak too.
They should have paid more attention to what was on that property before they named streets and did all these things.
I think people did get that point, so I appreciate that. Thank you. I saw Mr. Cohen, I saw Mr. And did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did.
And then I saw
George. Hello, everyone. My name is George Cohout, and I'm a member of the planning board, and I live up in Leeds also. I've been a member of the planning board for a while, so hanging around the edges of this discussion in a couple of different ways. First, I want to thank you very much for the presentation. It was great, very nicely done. All the good components are there. Some pieces I heard about here for the first time, which were wonderful. The whole part about the co-housing aspect was great. Appreciate that you've tried to outline some more green areas. That's great. A little peek at the trip generation. We had a good discussion at the planning board the other day because, and Frandy, I think, our representative to the CAC for the planning board will speak more about that later. But I just want to touch on a couple of things that we talked about that I think I represent the board on, and then a couple of things I probably don't represent the board on. So I'll try to decipher those for you, but maybe not. First of all, the planning board and myself were totally in favor of the 40R designation, the increase we want to see infill closer to the city, closer to the city hub rather than out in Leeds or Florence or the outlying areas. We think that's very typical, the epitome of smart growth. So in theory, we're supportive of the addition of homes. We're not quite sure where the idea of 100 homes came from, why it's not 80 homes or 65 homes. That might provide some more flexibility around recreational spaces or around more mixed-use buildings or around some different park areas, things of that nature. So I just want we want the CAC just to think about that and maybe discuss that with the developers before you do vote on this. Where does this figure of 100 come from? There are some fiscal projections, but I don't think that should be cast in stone. The original plan back in 2003 and even the revisions have had kind of benchmarks around commercial activity and space that's developed, and then the amount of housing that is built. And we want to know if there is an increase in houses, do those benchmarks also increase? Is there a certain square footage of commercial footprint or infrastructure that has to be developed? And if so, is that going to be increased before more houses, more residences are put online? Because the whole concept behind the village center was to be that mixed supportive base of commercial and residential, and certainly to myself and to many other people in Northampton, it seems to be leaning one way a little heavily. Certainly that's a product of this economic times, and we realize that, and we know the city and the developers have done their best to try to attract commercial usages there, but because we're having a hard time attracting those people, we shouldn't just give up the fight for that good mixture. Let's see, the previous speaker mentioned about the commercial activity that fronted on Route 66, and that's something that everyone was excited about, especially in the concepts of the original plan for the South Campus. And I think that still is very, very attractive and very important for the whole idea of the village mix. I can appreciate that as you go into the campus, the commercial buildings will front that street and give it a village look. But it also, without having it down Route 66, we won't create that draw and that appeal for pedestrian activity from Smith, from the city of Northampton up to the college. I think it'll be much more attractive having more commercial activity, perhaps where the assisted living is. The piece on the South Campus could be expanded as in the original concept, where that was expected to be a two-story kind of layout, and a variety of uses is there. So again, these are just other issues we want you to explore with the developer before you make your decision. It's somewhat unfortunate, I know this is a conceptual plan, but the CAC and the planning board do this little dance now about what is, who has the purview here and there. We're a little fearful that this conceptual plan, because the plans seem to be so set in stone that they'll just carry through to the site plan review that the planning board goes under. And it really is just a concept. We're talking about 100 homes. We're not talking about a park exactly here. We're not talking about the bungalows here. But unconsciously, I think once you see these illustrative designs, it kind of sinks in that this is what's going to happen. So the planning board is mindful that this is your bailiwick to make this decision, but we also hope that you involve the developers in some of these broader questions before you move on to a decision. The last thing is that came up, and I think it was referred to earlier, as kind of the balkanization of the residential development. That's kind of strong, but I live up in Leeds, and it's a very mixed neighborhood. There are small bungalow homes. There are larger homes in my area. There are two-family homes, and they're all on the same street. I think looking at this conceptual plan, I do see kind of a stratification of homes, more or less, and perhaps of incomes, that I think we should be mindful of. But again, I believe that'll be down the road, perhaps also during some site plan review. And my last point is I appreciate the effort put into identifying the green spaces, but in many ways it appears to me those are the protective spaces that Mr. Wright talked about around some of those specimen trees that need to be there regardless. So I think for the developer really needs to look at some more creative use of some larger spaces that might not just be a tennis court size, but might be a larger open field that doesn't have the specimen trees where people can really get together to do more larger activities. And along those lines, I think for a real village concept, I'll second the motion that there should be some kind of community gathering place. It's just not a park, but built in some kind of structure. And I know you mentioned it during the co-housing concept, which would be great, but my understanding of co-housing, that's pretty much their community gathering place. But this place might need a good pub or something. Really have without drawing everybody up from camp, they'll only serve 6 beers there instead of 12, perhaps. But something along those lines for the community to use. So again, there's a number of issues I think that need to be discussed with the developers. I think the other planning board members hope that you take your time and really have this discussion in a thoughtful way. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You're next.
I'm Ed Hagelstein. Live on Northampton Street here in Florence. I was very glad to hear that we were going to reduce the number of vehicle trips from the site. And I'm sure you've all heard this before, that 8,816 vehicle trips is equal to a line of traffic 29 miles long, which would run from City Hall to Bradley Field approximately. And the impact of injecting that into Northampton's traffic every day would be phenomenal. I'm sure you all remember the Warp Tour. I think that was 4,000 cars that brought us to our knees, as I recall. It's literally stopped all traffic in Northampton. So I think we still have a slight problem with this 6,400 number. We're still in a little trouble here. And back in 2003, when we commented, the public was able to comment to the final environmental impact report. I wrote a comment that I'm just going to give you some numbers here. In the final environmental impact report, in section 5.8.2.3, transportation demand management, TDM, it is stated that participation in the Route 9 Transportation Management Association is a fundamental component of the TDM program. And at that time, I said, according to my information, the Route 9 TMA was suffering from a lack of grants to operate. And I also said that this is due to a lack of subscribership. It's an indication that it is not supported by the general public and may cease to exist, thereby negating all the listed Hospital Hill TDM strategies requiring Route 9 TMA support. And the response to that came back was very, very brief. It says, HHD, which I guess that's Hospital Hill Development, has committed an initial $5,000 in funding to the TMA. And they also want to say it is just one of the mechanisms Hospital Hill Development would use to meet its 35% reduction target. Well, if it was just one of the mechanisms, it seems strange that they referred to it as the fundamental component of the TDM program. So I didn't really care for that answer. And as I was looking at this today, I just Googled the Route 9 TMA to see if there was any news there. And back in February 2004, in the Connecticut River Crossing Transportation Study, came up with it says here that the Route 9 Transportation Management Association was established in 1999 and included members such as the City of Northampton, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Smith College, Cooley Dickinson Hospital, and the University of Massachusetts. Federal funding for the program expired in 2002, and the TMA is no longer in operation. So a lot of this traffic work that is going to be done, they don't exist anymore. And so I think that's a major concern here. I think that's all I have to say about this matter. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have anything they want to say about that TMA issue?
No, we have ongoing commitment to trip reduction. That, as Dave mentioned, this is just the preliminary analysis.
Do you want to mention the bus?
Yes, there's a bus route now going to the site, which was a major leap forward in terms of allowing on-site residents to get back and forth without the use of their cars. So funding's in place for at least a full year. We'll be working with the city to help support that.
Yeah, Mr. Fide, and then it goes to Fran Bolton, and then Mr. Murphy.
Just quickly in terms of the Route 9 TMA, those efforts are continuing in different hands. The mayors convened a meeting of Northampton, Hadley, and Amherst from maybe 2 or 3 months. Talked generally about transit issues and TMA issues. UMass Transit, which is one of the staff at TMA, continues to be very interested in those issues. Smith College just added recently funding of $5,000 a year for park and ride lots in the area. So those efforts continue. The entity itself may change its structure, but the same players are equally involved with those issues.
Right. Thank you.
I'm Fran Bolton, Northampton. I was one of the people who worked very hard, among others who were here, to get this thing passed on the referendum back a few years ago. And I've been a supporter of the project ever since, and still am. I appreciate the opportunity to come tonight, and I'm so glad that you're having this hearing and giving us all a chance to weigh in. I want to make two kinds of comments. One is about the plan, the other is about the process. I think what you've heard tonight is a lot of folks who live here wanting to take a kind of ownership of this plan, wanting to be involved in its final product. And I think that's just great. There's no way that any single developer, no matter how good they are and how hard they listen, can go away and get it all right. So I think this is part of a process that's really necessary for us to engage in, and I'm so glad that you all are prepared to do this. I myself would have a number of questions about this plan. Some of them have been stated by others. I wonder if you need to take that whole piece of open space at the top of the hill and put those little plop, plop, plop houses there in order to get our 100. Maybe you do. I don't know if there are other ways of looking at that. I don't know where the garages and the driveways are going to go and what that's going to do to the streetscape. I've come to be much more concerned than I was 10 years ago about the details of design and the way that really affects the quality of life. And I want us all to pay a lot of attention to that. I was taken by the idea that there may be little sub-neighborhoods going up here that might influence the way people interact with each other. I worry a little about some of the lack of green space, actually. But I'm not an authority on any of this. I think the really important thing is that you all have a chance to let a variety of people with lots of different kinds of expertise weigh in on this. Get the ideas out on the table so that then you and the developers can come to the best possible solution for the long term, which is, I think, what everybody is hoping for. And just a word about process as we go along. I'm looking at Jack Horner over there. Jack has been the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, and one of the things he's done on that committee is to always hold public hearings well in advance of when any vote is going to be taken. The reason for that is that if you're really going to listen to people, you have to have a chance to listen to them. You can't vote the same day that they come and talk to you. So I'm hoping that that will be a model for what happens now with the CAC, and that good practice is adopted here, and that we all have a chance to have a conversation about this, have a process for having a conversation about it. If it's gone on for 23 years, 2 or 3 more months is not going to break it. So thank you all very much for what you're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, I think that's
And one of the things about this
you
project...
have to identify yourself.
David Murphy, I live on Northampton Street. And one of the things about this project that always impressed me was the attention this committee gave to its economic sustainability. You know, traditionally, residential properties cost money to a community, and the commercial side, commercial industrial side, generates revenue. And you try and balance the two so they offset each other and they remain viable. And I think this committee has actually tried quite hard to sort of maintain a relationship between the commercial development and the residential development so that it remains economically viable and doesn't become a burden to the community to help support it. And as I understood it, the current number of approved units were viable with the current commercial component that was being built. Now we compressed, and I have supported the fact that we compressed it into a 40R district, which didn't exist back then. But theoretically, even compressed, that relationship should still be sustainable. What concerns me about adding another 100 units until we complete the current phase is to check that formula of sustainability. So I wouldn't say never add the 100 units to the mix, but I might say, you know, you've got a balance now that theoretically worked. It geographically shrunk a little bit, but the unit count and the commercial square footage you've tried to maintain. Now, you estimate the taxes to be generated for the commercial side with an estimate, but it's still an estimate. So many square feet by your current tax rate means X amount of dollars, but it doesn't necessarily build in absorption. How quickly does it rent out? How quickly does it actually get on the tax rolls? On the residential side, the expensive thing that you've identified, and it's true, are children in school. They're the most expensive component on the residential side. We try to estimate the number of those based on the rest of the city, but you really don't know until it actually gets built out. We've also said it's going to be market driven. So, you know, further phases will start to be built when in fact there's a market demand for them. So I might suggest, since the current model as approved, theoretically to this point is economically viable, build that out before you commit to the rest of it. If nothing else, you'll know by the time this gets built out if the estimates were correct on the commercial side, if the estimates were correct on the residential side, how that ratio or relationship is working, and where you may need to tweak it. Because frankly, I like the design for the next 100 units much better than I like the way the original concept was set up. I think there's been a lot more thought gone into it. When we started, this 40R didn't even exist. Now it does. We don't really know what will come down the road for the next 100 units, but my suggestion might be before you commit to them, build out what's already there, build out what was planned to work, then examine it, see what other opportunities are available when that time comes. And if it's market driven, set a threshold. Say, hey, when there's so many units left to be developed and demand is steady, then we'll deal with what's the state of the art now to build out the remainder of it. So I think you're all doing a good job, and I think you'll thoughtfully approach the question of more units. But I think there's a lot to be learned by the absorption of the current ones approved and the passing of time. So thank you.
Anything else? Okay. So we're now going to go into the committee's discussion. And this is the time to ask questions of mass development, the traffic folks, everybody else, before we have our own discussion. This is really what do you want to know from them? And then we'll move into our discussion. So, Mr. Placid.
This morning I paid another visit to the site and took a very close look, including a number of pictures of what I would have to say are the three albatrosses in this project, namely the three brick buildings that are considered to be historically significant but are in terrible condition. If you take a close look at them, they are a real detriment in their present condition. They're dangerous. What is going I know they're owned by the state, and I suppose they're on the market, but is there an update on where that stands? Because right now that is a real negative, I think.
As to the mail attendance building, it's been marketed by the brokers, and they've had sporadic interest in it.
It'd be nice to see them reused. I'm not against that.
Right.
But the coach house particularly is
right. We share the idea of preserving these important buildings. So the mail attendance building, we've been actively marketing it for over 3 years. There's been sporadic interest, and as you can well imagine, the obstacle to redeveloping that building is the cost versus what it's worth.
It's huge.
The coach house, what we have done is, we have not programmed the coach house, but what we've done is we're going to, preserve the roof and then next spring replace the roof. We're developing various conceptual plans for how it could be used by a business or how that business could maybe co-occupy the space with community space.
Well, we'd love to see community space there.
Various programs, we're considering it. So between replacing the roof and coming up with conceptual plans by our architects that would suggest to other businesses how they might reuse this building, we hope to further promote the coach house. Again, the coach house, like the mail attendance building, our brokers have been marketing it continuously for 3 years. The North Employees Home, what the current interest, I think, in this committee is the artist live work. So we started to explore with the city, how could you make that feasible? How could we make that attractive location for artist live work? But again, it's attracting enough dollars to rehab that building and make it usable.
If that, well, I won't continue. I'm sure other people want to get into it.
But your basic question, I think people understand the concern.
Yeah, I think there's widely concerned. And if that market isn't there, those buildings still have to be dealt with.
Well, I think there'll be another conversation. Mm-hmm. Other questions for either the developers, the engineers? Yeah.
I've gotten lost in the history of this, going back to the original RFP, and we we made some assumptions back then that were incorrect. We assumed that we were going to have 2, 3, 4-story commercial buildings on the south campus, which was going to allow for 800 good-paying long-term jobs, I think was the way it was stated in the RFP. And that doesn't look possible now because of the Toyota model that is being looked at for the Colmorgan space. And so we're not going to have the job creation that we originally hoped for. So, and the 207 units prior to 40R was a definitive number. We're now talking numbers that really show a greater imbalance of residential space to commercial space, residential development to commercial development. And so, as somebody who was part of the process as a member of the planning board from 1991 when we wrote the zoning, to rewriting the zoning when I was on the planning board, and I don't know, it was in 2002 we rewrote the zoning to meet the master plan. I'm now confused. I'm confused about the, I know this is market driven, and I know that there is a necessity, and I, you know, I wish Jonathan hadn't left, because I agree with Jonathan that we need to tell the world that we're determined to develop this in a reasonable and attractive way, so that he is not a standalone up there trying to sell market priced homes. But I don't want, you know, I want to look at what David Murphy said about the ratios. You know, the ratios used to work, and the ratios were based on some, again, false assumptions. We thought there were going to be 3-story buildings on the south campus, and they're not. The ratios also had to do with benchmarks that George Cohen mentioned about the ratio of square footage of commercial space to residential space, and how is that going to be impacted? In other words, if we continue beyond the 207 units and we don't build the commercial space, are we living up to the benchmarks that the planning board set, which was, I think, an 85% ratio of commercial to residential? Is that a oblique question? Did I go around the...
There's a lot in that question, so I just
There's a lot in that question.
jump in and say, just with Colmorgan coming in, you've already met those ratios. So that sort of, that imbalance that you're talking about really doesn't exist, because we haven't built that many units on the North Campus as compared to the Colmorgan project being realized. The other thing that I wanted to point out, and I don't know if this was in your question, but we've only showed you commercial revenue projections tonight. We've not shown you residential revenue projections, and we can certainly do that. So the 500 or so thousand that you're going to get on the commercial side is in addition to the residential tax revenue. So when you're balancing costs and revenue, you got to put that in the picture as well. The other third thing to point out is that just by taking the T buildings down, 70,000 square feet of space was lost. And just by taking Colmorgan off Earl Street, where it really never quite fit, another 100,000 was taken out of the equation. So what's happened, I think, is that 476,000 square feet was kind of a wish list number. And then when we started to actually site commercial spaces in the places that they wanted to go, in the places that the market would actually want to buy them, as was pointed out, they want to be in a high traffic area. Then we got realistic about what could really be supported. And that's when 476,000 square feet went down to 361,000 square feet, which is still a very good number and still an economic driver. And the fact that we do have the opportunity on this site to retain a Colmorgan is a great thing as well. And what that Colmorgan coming to that site is, I think, was pointed out by the people on the CAC, is you do get that balance back, and you do start to generate some of the customers for some of these smaller retail and office operations. So, I don't think I completely answered your
I'm in agreement with you, and I also wanted to point out to Darryl LaFleur that the tax revenue from the King Street property that Colmorgan currently owns will be paid by somebody else, but there will be tax revenue derived from that property which will support your numbers for the state hospital's property, based on the fact that there's still, it won't be an offset, it will be additional tax dollars that Cohen Morgan will be paying up on the hill versus the tax dollars they're currently paying for the property on King Street.
Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Horner?
I'm not sure when the right time to have,
I think we're sliding away from the questions and into discussion because I'm not hearing, are there other questions for the developers? If not, they can ask them as they come up.
I'm going to stay the floor for a second. I had a question of Joel, but he's left now, relative to the interplay of what the charrette may have had relative to flaws or compliments relative to this project, and whether their information has been shared with the architects, developers, and stuff. And so that was my question relative to his opening comments, in terms of trying to understand how that has been integrated, if at all.
You mentioned a website, and I wonder if you could identify the website.
We actually make copies of their two plans, and I think, well, you can look.
Well, I just, that's, so.
What's that?
I'm sorry.
so I'll ask a question, which is, what thoughts do you have about the affordability, the market affordability ratio for these proposed 100 units?
I think as we mentioned the last time, I think we perceive these units as being small A affordable, meaning that because they're smaller units on smaller lots, that they would be affordable to a section of the market that's not being served now. So for example, there is affordability that's created by the tax credits, which is subsidized. But what we're really hoping to create here is affordability to the entry-level buyer by having these smaller lots and smaller houses. And to really, serve a segment of the residential community that's not being served now, because there is no stock of houses in the lower price range.
So the only other thing I want to say is I think this is an important part of the discussion that we need to have. I appreciate that answer, but it raises as many questions as it answers.
Well, why don't you put out the questions, because that's what we should be getting, is generating a list of questions that we think we need to find the answers to. So did you say raises questions, maybe you should identify those questions?
Not right this second,
Okay,
but I will work on it.
That would be helpful,
Yeah,
because I think the question of the ratio of affordability is one of the questions, and then what are the ancillary questions that come out of that we need to know.
Yeah.
I have a question about traffic, and it may be that it has more to do with planning than specifically with the developers, but I've been sitting here thinking about the traffic flow out of this development between Cohen Morgan and all the residential development. And there's areas that are already choke points in the city, particular in this case, Old South Street, which is would be the flow out of that area for any commuters headed southward from the city, or the area of between St. Mary's and Center for the Fine Arts, for people headed out of that development into the city or across the bridge. And I guess my question is there, I mean, I'm no alarmist, I don't have an answer, but is there some reassurance that this development is not going to cause a vast traffic jam in those areas? Because they're already pretty bad. I drive through them myself, and they're pretty bad. And it seems like, as I was charting out the traffic flow, Old South Street is going to get hammered, and the St. Mary's Center for the Fine Arts deal there is also going to get real busy. Is that true, or what do you think is going to happen there? I don't know.
I think the reassurance there is that this whole project is part of the NEPA certificate, and so they issued their original impact report on the traffic of the project, as well as other impacts of the project. And every time we make a modification, either add or take away trips, we have to go back to them and they have to recertify that this project works. And so that's the next step, as I pointed out in that chart, is should you approve this concept master plan, then we'll take the next step of analysis. We'll go back to NEPA and we'll ask for them to issue a notice of project change that these traffic impacts are acceptable.
Harriet, I saw your hand up.
No, you didn't.
Did I have a hallucination?
Well, I always have a question.
That's all right.
But I guess I do have a question, which is,
My hallucination came
This is
through.
where
yeah,
clairvoyant.
that's all I had to do, dream, all I had to do is dream it. But the original basis of balancing commercial and residential, was that based on what we thought would make it sustainable, or how did we exactly determine those numbers as the optimum numbers? And because that's kind of what I'd like to know. I mean, I guess I was here for it, but I'd like to hear our thinking to see if we've shifted fairly far away from it, or if we believe that this plan with the amount of commercial space we have in it, 361,000 square feet and 100 extra homes,
Yeah.
if that's still, why do we believe it's in balance?
My memory, and Dan and Bruce were there, and Ed was there, and I'm trying to think who else I've been there, was that the 500 to 800 jobs were really, we pulled that out of a hat, and at the square footage, we said about 500 square feet of commercial space.
My recollection was that there was no optimum number, there was merely a desirable number, and that we were trying to achieve that blend, that balance, that lockstep, where we would be able to have the commercial and the residential balance, so it wasn't just pure residential, and we weren't going to be able to have all commercial, and so it was a number out of the air, but it was I think a thoughtful one with some of the consultants that the people then at the time had part of the RFP process, the whole history.
Yeah, I mean, we had some guidance from DCAM at the time, but I will say that I never was totally comfortable with the guidance because we had about 17 different staff people from DCAM during that period, so it was difficult to totally. And we also didn't necessarily use a formula to say what's the ratio of residential to commercial particularly.
I think I remember the 85%, but my recollection was that there was going to be some divergence from 1 to 1, and the square footage that was proposed was to try to get as close to what it would be, acknowledging that the reality of the marketplace would ultimately determine. But we were going to try to keep that.
I just did some back of the napkin numbers here, just trying to figure out this I think would be helpful for when we talk about this in further detail, which I don't think we're going to get to the final discussion tonight. But if you look at the commercial plus the residential tax rate, and I think we can look at the residential taxes as well and put those together, we're looking at about $1.7 million in total. I think that's, probably about right, assuming about an average $350,000 per home, because you have some relatively expensive homes and then some more expensive homes. The ratio is about 30% covered by commercial, 70% residential, which is about 10% better than we're currently doing. And remember, in the city, about 6% of the land generates about 20% of the taxes on the commercial side. So I think we're doing better than we would be doing in the rest of the city right now with the plan, if my numbers are right. Again, I want to go back and really...
And I think those were the numbers that Jerry originally projected when he did when Community Builders did the first projection for us. I think it was about $1.9 million total revenue, and that was based on 1550. I think was the rate at the time.
I'm really, this was really me using a calculator.
No, but I'm just saying.
Right,
I don't think it's unreal. I don't think it's totally unrealistic.
I think we need to come back and give you two numbers. One is the total tax revenue, including the residential, to the best of our ability, knowing that the numbers can move around. But and secondly, what's the ratio of commercial to residential taxes, which I think is a helpful number.
That's a good number, but are you going to base it on 227 or are you going to base it on 327?
I would do it on both. Okay. But the other thing is, and I think Daryl asked a good question, or I'm not sure who asked it around the cost, and again, looking at the cost, if Wayne's numbers are accurate around kids, and even if you rounded them up some, we're still paying for them totally out of the commercial side of development without even touching the residential portion of the taxes. Just when you think about it, that's important to remember.
I think, you know, and I think we have to, I agree with Jack, I think we have to look at the affordability issue, because I think that is going to possibly drive us from the 62 units, additional 62 units that's shown on that plan, to the additional 100 units if it turns out that the bungalows are a viable, sellable, affordable housing choice. I think that, you know, I don't know, you're talking 1,200 square feet? Is that what we're talking about?
Somewhere in 1,000.
A little bit more than that. So I think that that's going to, you know, otherwise I don't know what, you know, we haven't seen the third iteration. We've seen this. We saw the plan with the bungalows just north of the...
Early on, there were a couple of different scenarios. Maybe we can bring them back.
Yeah, what we did was we showed the bungalows, we showed another one with more townhouses. So there were several iterations of other concepts.
In the northern portion of the campus?
Yeah, kind of in that central portion of the campus. Yeah. But the idea was that we keep returning to the idea that this is a concept plan. And once you actually get out there and start measuring lots and making sure you're far enough away from trees and things like that, the actual number in any given area changes. And so we were asking for that 100 to have the flexibility not only to market the different types of houses, but to account for how things may shift around once you actually get into site planning these units.
It's helpful for us to remember that we have the responsibility for the overall master plan. The planning board ultimately has the site plan approval for how things are fitting on the site. We have to generally know it, but they're into the specifics. Is that fair to say? Mr. Fogel actually still had the floor, and I don't want to be accused of taking it.
Thank you, I don't remember, I remember asking the question of why 100, and I don't remember getting an answer that either was clear enough for me to remember or clear. And acknowledging age and all those other factors that go into it, what we're looking at is showing 62. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the issue of the 100 was just for flexibility?
Right.
Okay, and then I'll give you a chance, I just want to make sure I get it all out. And so when the thing that struck me most was that progressive slide that talked about the agency and then the CAC and then the planning board and then the city. So that if we gave you partial approval for 50 or 60 or whatever, then you'd have to go back and do that whole dance and the MIPA and the FEIR and all the alphabet soup of everything else?
That is correct.
Okay, but then my last piece to this question, and I've got a number of them here in terms of trying to be efficient, is that if we gave approval up to 100, is there some way that we can retain some sort of control over when that gets freed up that is complementary to the planning board rather than usurping their authority and power? Is that a possibility for this?
That's a good conversation for us to have. I don't know, but that'll add that to the question.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's, I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got my thought.
That's okay. The extra units that are not shown on the plan were the result of alternatives, various alternatives. And they do provide us that flexibility, and as you very correctly pointed out, that flexibility extends to only having to go back to MIPA one time, saying this is the most we'd ever do. We haven't plotted it out now, so that when we do go back in and plot out and see that we have a little more room here, but a little less over here, that we can accommodate those shifts and know that we're going to stay under that ceiling of 100.
So,
one last thing that when I answered this question the last time for you, I don't know if it was a satisfying answer because it's come up again, but this planning has not been numbers driven. This planning has occurred from the ground up. We looked at the topo, we looked at the specimen trees, we looked at the kind of sustainable community we wanted to create, and we said, let's plot that out. And wherever the numbers land, they land. So it's really been a planning process based on the planning principles that we enumerated in that slide, rather than, gee, we need 100 more units to make this project work.
acknowledging that we're on this, we have the same mission or goal, I think, in the long run, and I appreciate what you and your group are doing, is that spigot possibility relative to the numbers up to 100 a problem for you, something you haven't thought about yet, or something you could embrace?
I think,
Or a question that you understood.
yeah.
Got it.
She nodded.
Or she nodded off.
I guess it goes back to what do you mean by a spigot?
Well, I meant if we're going to approve up to 100, but I only want to see 40 tomorrow.
And I think the market is on your side in that respect. This is a
Right,
is a
but I'm looking for a little
long-term.
more control, being a control freak of sorts.
Yeah, this is a long-term master plan, and that's what we're trying to get to. If there's some kind of gradations that you want to build into it, or, you know, you can do the extra 65 and then come back to us for the next, 35, whatever it is that might give you a comfort level. I don't know
But I also,
how you might do that.
well, let's, it's
Thank
on the
you.
list, yeah. Oh, sorry, Joe had his hand up, and then we're over to you.
I wonder, given that we're already 40 minutes past our time, and I don't feel ready to, I don't feel that we're ready to vote on this, if it wouldn't be a good time to continue the meeting to another date.
I want to make sure we have all the questions out, and I think we were getting them, so if there's any other questions, I think would be very helpful so that people know. So first off, are there any other questions, not necessarily to the developer, but questions that people think the CAC needs to grapple with as well? I mean, so Jack brought up a really important one, which is the ratio of affordable housing to market rate housing, and smallly affordable. Are there other questions like that that people think we need to have on the table that we know we're going to come back and discuss? Charlie?
What do you want to accomplish tonight?
I
What more do you want to accomplish?
I want to get those questions on the table, and then I want to set it.
Do you want to vote tonight?
I don't think we're ready to have a vote tonight, but that's what I'm sensing from the group, so that's fine. But I would like to know what questions people want their fellow CAC members to be thinking about as we go over the next couple of weeks, and I'd like to set another meeting date. And I'd also like to suggest, in preparation for that meeting date, we may want to think about having a joint meeting with members of the planning board and members of the Northampton Housing Partnership to talk about specifically the affordable housing issues and some of the other issues, if that's useful to people. So I'm going to limit the discussion to questions or comments on that. So,
Question, would you just mention the subcommittee on
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
community
to,
centers?
I didn't mean to mention that, although.
Just to put that on
There
record.
also is, because somebody mentioned it at the beginning, and we didn't get to put that in on, we have, I mentioned the last time that we were putting together a subcommittee to look at this issue of, and I'm going to not just call it community center, I'm just going to talk about community amenities, because the issue of park maintenance and a lot of other issues fall into that. So there is a group, I think Dave Modulewski has agreed to serve on it, Brad has. Harry, did you agree to be on that?
I'll be on it.
And I think, was hoping Councilor Narcoitz was on that committee, but he may have moved.
That looks like a volunteer nod.
He may have moved and left before we could address it. I'm not
Social
sure, so-
pressure.
And it's up to
I'll do
him.
my best, I'm a little swamped.
I know you are, so it may not be Councilor Narcoitz, but we may need another person. So there's that group. But, so are there questions that, big picture or small picture questions that people know that we need to be thinking about? Commercial to residential space ratio, and both in terms of square footage and tax revenue, which I think is the, an understanding of the taxes. I have a whole list of questions people brought up.
Well, the ones that I had listed, if I usurp the floor again, is just this concept of the staging or the spigot, however I use the
Okay, so
analogy.
I'm going to call it phasing.
Okay.
Is that fair to call it
That's a
that?
mature word that
Okay.
I couldn't get to. The issue of
Spigot was good.
the lockstep relative to the commercial residential, and in my own mind's eye, building it and having it available is a substantially different experience than filling it. And so I'm hung up on that piece.
Well, let's keep that under phasing, because that's all part of phasing.
Okay. The blending of the neighborhoods relative to not creating these, trying to pick the right word, enclaves of housing. I'd like, again, as a Forbes Avenue native, or at least long-term resident, the concept of all the different styles of housing is something I'd be very interested in making sure. Embracing the concept of the infill and smart growth, how to get that done in the context of the commercial. This Notre Dame piece, I can't read this because my eyesight is failing, but I'd like to see what that might be in terms of a broad cross-section. I want to be reinformed about the process relative to what we do and how it plays out down the line. I'd like to understand job creation versus retention relative to the number of jobs that were in that slide about jobs that are already here in terms of Colmorgan. I'd like to know about the commercial numbers relative to the space that are already provided for relative to Colmorgan and DCA. And then I think the concept of that revenue thermometer relative to both jobs and revenue relative to what's going on up there, so we can. I have a big family.
So that last one, you want to know current tax generation and current
I think
jobs.
it's,
Okay,
you know,
yeah.
in terms of the public and what we're trying to accomplish here, it would be important to be able to see.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else with questions? Yeah.
I wonder if we couldn't have, you know, the proposal, we sat together on, I think we walked up, the whole group of us, or most of us walked on the site with the developers and talked about sort of what we envisioned. And then basically, you all came back with this plan, and I think we've talked some more and heard from the public, and but the plan hasn't been greatly revised from the first time we saw it, and it may not need to be revised depending on what we decide on, but it seems to me that this picture has like determined the whole discussion to some degree, and it's the first picture we had. I wonder, it seems to me that we could be presented with another possible scenario, and I think we could probably very quickly come up with sort of in the next meeting what that other scenario might be. Perhaps 75 homes, perhaps a community center. I mean, it seems to me like this has come before a discussion of, you know, what we really need to have in here. It's not that it isn't a good picture. It may end up looking exactly like that. But, you know, if the picture is going to be such a determiner, then we need to have more than one picture. And I think that, you know, refusing to draw another one is like, makes it very hard for us to have a discussion that seems to be going anywhere.
Well, let's talk about the parameters of the picture. So, because you have to do an apples-to-apples comparison. So if we ask the developer to draw another picture with the same site constraints, with the same number of units laid out differently, because it has to be apples to apples.
No, I'm just saying we could change the number of units,
Well,
we could ask for other things.
but
I'm not
that's-
saying we should, I'm just saying after we have the next discussion.
I guess I'm saying in order to ask them to do it, it really should be apples to apples.
Is there a slide somewhere that we don't have to look at again, but is it there that shows just the units which have been either built or permitted?
Yeah.
To me, that's where we ought to start. So the rest of it's a blank slate.
Well, that's where we did start in August or September.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's me for this next discussion.
That
rather
right
than-
there, Jack, is what you're referring
That
to.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, that's, okay, so that, to me, that's a great starting point.
Could we have in print your projected spreadsheets on job creation? The one, I forget what the light industry was it 172? Was that the number?
172,000 square feet of light industrial.
But what was the jobs? 137 jobs?
That's not right, because Colmorgan's coming in.
Colmorgan's coming in with 290 and potentially up to
Yeah, no,
450.
you're right, that's.
So I'm just,
Right, those were based on the CDAG numbers that we used.
We need to have a real.
And we're not
yeah, so if you have a spreadsheet that you can, it's defendable.
But we know we have actual tenants with actual jobs, we should put the actual tenants.
Right.
It's gonna be higher than that, but just.
So, on this other alternate picture question, I mean, I guess people have that picture of what's currently permanent. I think they can do whatever they want with that picture. right?
I don't want to ask the developer to do another
That's what I'm trying
picture
to figure
for us,
out.
you know, that wasn't my intent at all. Not yet.
Can we,
Well, not yet, I
will
agree.
someone be able to explain this Notre Dame plan to us? I mean, it actually begs more questions than anything. I mean, it has to be buildings up there, right?
Jamie's speaking, and it's not in your heart. Can you speak a little louder?
Sorry, people speak very highly of the Notre Dame plan, Bill Russell and others, and I think it's worth us considering it, given that they've gone through all this effort, but it really begs a lot of questions. For instance, the Haskell building doesn't exist anymore, and that's really not ours to destroy. So I'd really like to give this fair air.
We also show twice as many housing units as Beth wants to build.
Yeah, so maybe we can build 1,000 housing units out there. If the numbers work, then so be it, but it also shows
build them in Indiana.
I would like to follow up on that issue. I mean, this is a little confusing, but I'm intrigued by the effort that the Notre Dame charrette apparently accomplished. And I think what would be useful to us is to hear those other ideas that may, in fact, turn a group and cluster of houses into true community. What might be missing that we may have missed in this process? What is it that connects not only the village itself, but I think something that Barbara said earlier is very important, is what about the integration of the surrounding community to Hospital Hill? And whether or not we've given enough serious thought to those other kinds of planning efforts that might be able to better accomplish that. And I'm not sure that that hasn't been done, but it would be, you know, in the very beginning of this process, I think we all had places like Seaside or other communities in mind where they talked about front porches and sidewalks connecting houses and integrated post offices and the genuine notion of a laid out community. And I'm wondering whether or not, what is it that we're missing that the Notre Dame folks may have come up with without reinventing the wheel, because we are constricted by the geography and by some of our own concerns here about the number of housing units and the development of commercial space and jobs. But we should not miss the opportunity, I think, to take a look and see whether or not there might be something else that's missing here in an attempt to create a genuine community, an integrated community.
Well, the folks who were the ones who worked the closest with the Notre Dame people are gone. Wayne did go out and meet with that group and with some other planning professionals, is that right, Wayne? And had conversations with them about all these drawings. And is this the iteration that came after your conversations?
That's what they showed us when we were out there.
So I don't know if they've made some modifications on this. They're supposed to come on the 13th. I will say that they are perfect, I think, from my understanding, is they're perfectly happy to obliterate Haskell because they're seeing these drawings as totally conceptual and not particularly grounded in, you know. And one example is the road that crosses Route 66 south, east of we've already had the DPW say there's no way that they're going to ever permit that road because of the slope. So, you know, there's some things that they did there that are great ideas, but it may be good to have them do a summary of this and say, this is how many housing units this is what we project for commercial, just to get their input.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily saying that Arrow Street has done nothing. I mean, it's just
Right.
trying to get the
Right.
broad picture
Based
that
on-
we can then begin to.
Based on what I see here, I would not be in favor of, I think it would be a waste of our time for them to have them come talk to us, because I think they've ignored a lot of very important stuff. In terms of integrating with the neighborhood, that this diagram would be a disaster for the neighborhood.
Well, I guess I'm saying, I'm not saying it has to be embraced.
In terms of density of development, this is like hugely more density than what they're proposing.
So if they have one good idea because they weren't burdened by the practicality, maybe it
I
improves
think
everything.
asking them for a summary of the project and what they see as their good ideas, you can have it, you can give it the weight it deserves. Isn't that what Judge is saying? I'm going to give it the weight it
I'll just
deserves.
be content if we can go see them. Can we schedule the next meeting?
Well,
I'm
some
sorry.
people still want to talk.
South Bend?
Unbelievably
In the
enough.
winter?
Mr. Johnson.
Well, one of the things really noticeable about the Notre Dame plan is the streetscape, which is very pronounced, and then the virtual total loss of streetscape along Route 66. So the new plan I think it's one of the things that disturbs the planning board the most. So I guess I have to put it in the form of a question. Is it possible to relocate the assisted living away from the streetscape area, and is it possible to increase the streetscape buildings along Route 66?
You want to speak to the assisted living issue?
I'm not sure I understand the question on assisted living. To locate it away from, oh, I got you. In other words, to
move it someplace else and use the location near Route 66 for commercial, other.
Yeah, we envision buildings along Route 66.
In other words, I'm sorry, you were saying moving
Yes.
it this way so you know. We did, you may recall, several years ago, we did a study for mass development showing buildings.
Yeah, that's the one we like.
Right.
And the difficulty was several-fold. One is the slope in here is pretty dramatic, and it's falling off rapidly. And so what we found was that a retail storefront that starts here, actually it was over in this area, it starts here, within the length of the building is already down about a floor, maybe 3/4 of a floor to a floor. So if you imagine taking the main street in Northampton and sort of tipping it and saying, okay, at one end of the block I can come in, and at the other end of the block I'm half the level down again. It becomes very difficult to deal with in terms of retail planning. I think there was another concern. One of the things we would suggest for retail along a street like that is putting in parking along the front. And one of the issues we encountered was the concern about traffic coming down the hill and people doing parallel parking along there. So there was a number of issues that plan encountered. I think generally the sense is there's not a lot of demand for retail space, so we should concentrate it as much as we can and get as much a bang for it as we can.
Well, I think that's what Franny was saying, is that assisted living is in a place where you can get the traffic and the foot traffic and the consumer to it, and move the assisted living back into the North Campus somewhere. I think that's what he's, is that not it?
I think the dilemma is putting a road there, Fran, to get people into that commercial. That's the.
Well, they got it parked somewhere.
Right, but again, it's that streetscape, the visibility, that, I think that's the point.
And it's more.
And the other issue
And one of my
is
many
that
career opportunities.
the assisted
Shoot
living.
the messenger.
No.
Yeah, there's been tremendous interest in having assisted living in precisely that location, because typically folks who are pretty much stay-at-home want to be right at the front of the project and have the activity on both sides of the.
But let's add the Route 66 questions to the list.
That's what I wanted.
Okay. So I'm going to try to get us to some kind of resolution here. So I have put out a thought about whether or not we want to have kind of a working session discussion with Planning Board and Housing Partnership. Does that make sense to you? So we're going to try to schedule that ASAP. Okay. And then try to come back together as this group, maybe that first week or very early in the second week of December. Okay. All of these drawings are going to be, all of this stuff is going to be on the city's website. People can send comments or questions or anything to any of you, I'm assuming, but also to Corrine if they want them disseminated to the group as well. Corrine can act as the person who will disseminate it. And we'll have a way to have that happen from the website.
Green's run out of her head. She's writing on the back.
You need more paper?
Which means we have to end the meeting right now. Don't give her more paper.
And I'm not sure I want to try to schedule a date tonight, because we did attend the date scheduling at the last meeting. The newspaper covered it as the date, and it turned out that it didn't work for some people, and we rescheduled it. So I'd rather have us do a poll about dates with Kareem, but aim for, this is a Monday night, right? So I guess I'd try to have it about the same time, because the evening meeting works better in terms of getting a public meeting. Does that work? Yeah. So, but the first meeting we'll try to schedule is kind of a working discussion session with the planning board to hear their thoughts and concerns, and with the housing partnership, especially relative to this issue of affordability. Okay? try to come back the first or very early part of the second week of December.
It's gonna be a Monday night.
A Monday night, yeah, I know you sing on Monday night, but we like hearing you sing here.
So does,
Are you talking in the 7 o'clock meeting again?
Can it be a Tuesday night?
It's always gonna be bad for somebody.
Well, the second Tuesday.
Second Tuesday, better than first.
We're gonna do a poll, Corinne, maybe you can send something.
And also the planning board, right?
Well, we have 2 different meetings to schedule. We're gonna try to figure out how to schedule both. And I think the first one will be more like a workshop, not really vote taking, but more like a general discussion as opposed to votes being taken. Okay?
Do you anticipate another public hearing?
I think at the next meeting, we can certainly take public comments and then go into having our full discussion. And I guess there's a couple things we want to come back with. One is this commercial residential space ratio of affordable to market rate housing, having some more thoughts on that. The phasing issue, people want to think about, come back talking about integration of neighborhood or housing types is actually what people are talking about. More integration of housing types. The timeline on the permitting, and when I say phasing, I'm talking about the issue you had too in terms of current tax revenue, current jobs. I guess on Harriet's issue about is there another picture, I think people can take what is currently permitted and think about what they would see. There was some discussion about Route 66 in front, in the planning board's issue around stuff fronting on Route 66 that we can talk about with the planning board. There were a couple issues that came up during the public comment. We'll try to do a worksheet that shows also the cost in terms of school cost. I was giving you back a napkin, but I can try to do a better job on that. There were some smaller tree issues that I think it just would be helpful for the developer to clarify in terms of the new trees and mulch, et cetera. So if you could just clarify that.
Yeah, I have one other.
Okay, and let me just get one other out. There was a question that came up around soccer fields, and unfortunately, the city already had that conversation and made the deal for the soccer fields that we have now in return for the state giving us this property, or putting this property out to do this with it. So we already made the deal on the soccer fields a while ago. So I appreciate the fact that we need more soccer fields, and I agree with that. And we are looking throughout the city to find land for soccer fields. But we already did make a deal, I think, almost 2 mayors ago on the soccer field issue, didn't we? Is that with Santi, I think?
Or Orlander.
Or Orlander, or any of the people that have streets up there, except for Mr. Mosher. So.
It's mine.
Right.
2 questions. One is, if we discuss the phasing issue, what is the turnaround time for you for mass development with the MEPA process?
Once we have an approval on the CAC, we'll take it to meet then. It typically takes 2 to 3 months for them to.
Does that mean, to get to Bruce's point about phasing, or spigot, whatever the term is, if we were to approve 62 units or 52 units, whatever that number comes to, if you had to go back because we only gave you permission to do 62 units.
There's 2 issues, I think, there. One is that issue about how long does it take and so on, and going back to NEPA. The second is predictability for those people who are coming in, like Jonathan Wright, to say they're willing to take it on. What does the master plan totally look like? I think is another legitimate question that we have to talk about.
Big question.
Right. So.
And the second question was, Wayne, was there acreage that was surplus to the city during the zoning process for potential future school?
Parcel C, where the soccer fields are, we deliberately didn't take that into the recreation department, even though they potentially given up some funding sources to leave the options open. So it's recreation now, but it's not. We were talking about permanent protected open space.
So that's the acreage that was designated for the city.
Any city use, which is currently soccer.
But as a practical matter, in terms of building any new schools, that's really.
I'm not suggesting building a school. I'm just saying.
But for people who are in the room who may not,
No, I was-
20 years ago, there was a discussion about did we want a parcel up there, because there was growth in that part of the city, and were we going to
I'm just saying, if
new
there's
school?
other acreage that's been surplus to the city, possibly that, I
No.
was
That was
just
the
asking
case.
a question, okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah,
It's been many years.
yeah,
You know,
well, that's why.
1991, I think we wrote the zoning.
Right, that's why I'm clarifying that piece, that was the discussion then, but we also specifically didn't have it spelled out that it was for a school in the legislation either.
Right, just general city.
General city use, so. Anything else?
Move to adjourn?
That would be gratefully accepted. All in favor?
Thank you, good meeting.